Those who follow their destiny, and even those who have been loved by the gods all their lives, no one will escape it. Those who imagine themselves to be masters of their own lives are only naive swimmers who believe they can change its course. It is impossible to abandon one's destiny. No matter how thorny the path, no matter how much the wounds bleed, its spark burns within, and even if it seems that the goal is close, the river of fate can suddenly change course, dragging one into the abyss of suffering. The path of such people is written in blood and tears, every achievement a battle, every victory a loss. Fate will not leave anyone behind. Sooner or later it will catch up with everyone. It will flood the path with blood, burn out souls, and nothing will stop it on its way, not even a terrible, dirty death. Princess Valdina, a noble aristocrat, was acquainted with a certain man named Jason, who from the very first minutes made her insides tremble. His kind greeting still stood before the heroine's eyes, and it seemed that he was the best man in the empire. She loved this gentleman and just wanted to be happy with him one day, but fate was too cruel. In the dark, cold dungeon, every sound, every drop of water falling on the stone floor, echoed in the deafening silence. The torchlight, trembling in the guard's hands, illuminated a face she would recognize among 1,000, Jason. The fair-haired gentleman, whose eyes had once given warmth and hope, now looked at her with some strange, unreadable mixture of pity and detachment. The dampness penetrated the thin fabric of her dress. The cold burned not only her body but also her soul, as if squeezing her heart in an icy grip. She sat in shackles, an iron grate separating her from freedom, from life, from him. She loved Jason more than life itself, gave him her whole heart, and now, in this icy captivity, she waited for him to make a choice. The lady whispered his name, and the assistant sternly asked the girl to be silent, who did not dare to pronounce the name of His Majesty, but for him she did everything she could. He rejected her and took the saint as empress, making a choice between love and duty, between the heart and the crown. She had to steal the treasures of her country for him, but then she didn't even realize how wrong she was in doing all this. The heroine gave up her youth to slay the mad dragon, and all just to be with this man, to simply be loved. She bravely sacrificed the last warriors of her homeland, but her fate was too cruel, too unfair. She gave him the throne, gave him all of herself, honor, and dignity, and in return received only bitter, dirty betrayal. Jason blamed the prophecy for everything, because in return she made her son Leon the crown prince, and she should hardly want anything more. Unfortunately, Leon was dead, and only 6 months after the heroine sent him alone to the palace. Weeping beside the coffin of her only son, she then realized the terrible truth that had shrouded her life with this man. She understood perfectly well that she and her little daughter Leia would be next, and this man would stop at nothing to achieve his goal. Now he stood in the dungeon and spoke as if nothing had happened, asking if there had been no new prophecy and revelation that she and her daughter would bring destruction to this country. His composure struck deep into her soul, piercing Medea's very heart with a sharp blade. Instead of burning her at the stake as the prophecy commanded, I remember he granted her mercy, an easy death, but he did not understand why the girl was still full of resentment. There was no reproach or malice in her eyes directed at him, and she only asked him to end this show quickly so as not to see this disgusting sight anymore. Jason looked at the girl silently, but in reality he didn't care at all about what he did with her life. He didn't even feel sorry that she ended up with the children, but he assured her that the lady wouldn't be lonely, they would be together in heaven, and this supposedly consoled him. Medea realized with horror that this story turned out to be even more terrible than she had even imagined. Little Leia, this couldn't be, and did they really kill her, her little beloved girl? An aristocrat in luxurious clothes, Medea's sister, appeared in the dungeon and, looking at everything that was happening, haughtily asked her for forgiveness. It was Lady Verna. Medea, with pain and fear in her eyes, did not understand why she was here now, and whether this was really a big conspiracy. Before her imprisonment, the sister handed the little girl over to Verna, and was confident that she would take care of her. The baby cried and screamed, but this was the only chance to save her from the oppression of this gentleman. Verna had to cross the border with her daughter to keep her safe, and all this time, Medea trusted her friend completely. Now she knew that the insidious lady simply did not dare to betray His Majesty, and all this time she was in league with him. Verna laughed and asked if she would really dare to do such a thing, and if betrayal was wrong, and if her sister didn't understand that. Jason assured that the children would have thought exactly the same, they would have understood him, but the horror and cruel truth shattered Medea's heart into pieces in 1 second. She just hoped that her little girl was saved and safe, but it was not like that. There was nothing left to believe in, but this man turned out to be worse than a beast, a real vile deceiver who knew no pity or empathy. Medea felt a flame raging within her, an unquenchable thirst for revenge, but the chains bound not only her body, but also her spirit. Betrayal was evident in every stone of this cursed place. Her sister's hands were stained with her daughter's blood. For the whispers of consolation, for the false vows of fidelity, Medea paid with her trust and her life. Her sister enjoyed honor, but Medea rotted in this stinking hole, betrayed, humiliated, having lost everything. Jason decided that was enough. He was unlikely to find even a drop of generosity, and looking at the lady he said goodbye forever, promising to remember her merits. Verna, her sister, turned out to be the most terrible person. The day was cold today, and the gentleman did not want to linger in this place any longer. Lady Verna turned out to be the most terrible traitor, not just a pawn in someone else's game, but the very demon who, with a mocking smile, opened the gates of hell right at the threshold of Medea's heart. The irony of fate is that it was the very one to whom Medea was closest, the one to whom she trusted her innermost secrets, who dealt the most fatal blow. Silently, with icy calm, she threw a small red bag embroidered with silver threads at her feet. A bag that Medea would recognize among 1,000. It belonged to her daughter, little Leia. The ground disappeared from under her feet. The world went dark. All feelings suddenly disappeared, leaving only an emptiness ringing in her ears. Slowly, as if in a dream, Medea picked up the bag. When she handed the girl over to her sister, this bag was around her neck, and little Allie cried bitterly when she parted from her mother. Medea thought it was all just to save the little girl's life, but it was all in vain. Holding this bag in her hands, she heard a child's voice that was pouring out from the soul of a mother who had parted with her child forever. Verna watched her reaction without moving a muscle. There was no regret or remorse in her eyes, only calculating malice. She laughed and screamed. Her little sister pretended to be a princess, and what had happened? Valdina fell, and her brother was torn to pieces by monsters. At that moment, Medea realized that it was all over. Hope was shattered. The entire dungeon and her naive heart shook from the angry screams of her sister. In the dungeon, chained, she realized that only hell remained, and pain, all-consuming, paralyzing the will. Perhaps this hell was created by her stupid decisions, a bottomless hell where, in reality, only money ruled. Medea could not understand one thing: why her sister was so miserably happy and exhausted from hatred. The lady said with a grin that Medea could not be blamed. It was only thanks to her that they had come so far. Without her they would have failed, and Valdina's loyal vassals and her brother turned out to be not so simple. The word we echoed in the dungeon, and this meant that Lord Jason and her family had been in cahoots all this time, and they were all against Medea. It was she who rightly incited her to give Jason the relic called the Eye of the Sage, and from that very moment she was already participating in terrible plans. Medea was a very wise lady, but now she found herself just a toy in cruel hands, and she didn't even realize how long these plans had been made. From the very beginning, her entire life was in the hands of another family, thanks to which her faithful father would soon become the rightful king of Valdina, and she the rightful empress. She was just a small, tiny pawn in a huge game where there is no place for compassion, kindness, justice, but only envy and cruelty. Of course, her beloved Jason was in cahoots with them all this time. He knew everything perfectly well, and the more Medea learned the details, the more she hated them. Verna asked her not to be sad and promised that she would soon see her beloved family, and she could only rejoice. Perhaps these were her last words, and Medea promised that she would never forget Verna, nor her family, nor her entire damned clan. Medea found herself a pawn, a bargaining chip in a game of power where the stakes were prohibitively high, and the winner took all. In the dungeon, damp and stinking, Medea felt her hope gradually fading. She was held tightly by guards whose faces were stony and impassive, only mindlessly carrying out orders. A guard stood in front of her with a bottle in his hands filled with a deadly liquid, poison. Verna ordered that this poison be immediately poured into her mouth. Strong arms held her motionless, her head thrown back. The bitter liquid burned her throat, spreading through her body like icy needles. The sin of her stupidity could not be atoned for even by death, and no matter how many lives passed, before her death, Medea promised to return and take revenge on all who were guilty of her death. Her foolish past is their original sin, and to you who follow fate, those who are loved by the gods will still one day be punished. Even those closest to us can turn out to be the very puppeteers who pulled the strings of fate, condemning us to a teaching death. Only a cold and meaningless darkness swallowed her consciousness. In this story, the game was over. Medea lost. But until then, her anger will burn like an unquenchable flame, lighting the way to revenge, and let Verna tremble. The hour of her reckoning is near. Each of them will pay for her suffering, for her death. She promised to return, not as a ghost, not as a shadow of her former self, but as the embodiment of revenge itself, falling upon the heads of the guilty. The oath, like a seed thrown into the fertile soil of hatred, will sprout and bear poisonous fruit. The first breath, new life, and the voices of the maids were heard near the lady. They offered her to choose a new tiara for the upcoming event, and the lady had to give her consent. Was she really breathing again? Was she alive? Although perhaps it was just a dream, but too similar to reality. It was impossible to believe. Something had happened. She looked at her hands, which had just been in iron shackles. She was free. Her body was completely light. Nothing hurt, but just now she was like a dry rag, barely breathing. There was no trace left of the scars on his hands, and the countless wounds he had received during the campaign also quickly disappeared. It was too clear for the beautiful Hel, and could the heroine really have managed to become younger after her death? She couldn't understand what had happened, and why she remained alive, healthy and unharmed, when just now her throat had been burned by poison. The first thing she did was turn to the maid and mention Pele's name, but it turned out that people didn't immediately understand what she was talking about. Medea spoke about her brother and asked if he was still alive so that she could finally understand what was happening. The maids were frightened, and one of them said that it seemed that the mistress's fall from the horse had not gone unnoticed. His Majesty the King turned out to be alive and well, and the maids looked at their mistress with incredible surprise, as if she had really hit her head. She exhaled, and this exhalation was like a release after a terrible, deadly hell. This means she has a chance to correct the mistakes of the past, a chance to prevent betrayal, a chance to live. She warned the maids that they were going to go to her brother, but as it turned out, His Majesty was now on the battlefield. This meant that the punitive expedition was not yet over, and the maids continued to look at their mistress in surprise. They decided to call a doctor, assuring her that she had hit her head when she fell, but Medea needed to check everything with her own eyes to be sure. The ladies looked at the departing lady with fear, as if she had changed dramatically in 1 minute, but none of them knew what she had to go through. The world around her was familiar and alien at the same time, familiar because these were the walls of her home, a setting she knew by heart. She ran down the dark corridor to find out the truth and the time in which she managed to be reborn. The dark dungeon of Valdina's palace, and she ran to the very bottom of the spiral staircase, to a secret place accessible only to the chosen ones by blood. Medea knows she must be prepared. She is no longer a naive pawn in someone else's game. She is a player. Pictures of her past life clearly appeared in her memory, and the trembling in her hands could not be stopped. In the past, Medea ceased to be the guardian of Valdina's lands, and she cried bitterly because she did not give her brother that very eye of the sage. She needed to preserve the relic, but the brother did not blame his sister. The most important thing for him was that she remained alive. The sage belonged to their family, but because of strong love and careless stupidity, Medea gave him to the most terrible man. Her brother only wanted her to be happy, and for her life to no longer be in danger. Memories stabbed like daggers into her mind as she stopped at the door where she had last seen her brother. She tried to calm down because he was still alive. No real horror had happened, which meant the eye of the sage was also here. She was not mistaken. The sacred relic of the family was located in a dark dungeon, under the strictest magical protection. And this time she will set the rules. Her revenge will be carefully planned and ruthless. This new life, her weapon. Tears came to her eyes when she saw the sacred relic, realizing she had a chance to change the future. She will be able to save her family, save her only brother, her beloved little daughter, and never end up in that terrible dungeon. I would never have thought that in the past her relatives specifically asked to give it to the Grand Duke, who supposedly suffered and could not become perfect without him. She was specifically encouraged to believe that the sage's eye was only a national treasure in name and could be borrowed for a short time. Supposedly, relations between the countries will improve, her brother will understand her, and her children with the Duke cannot grow up without the protection of their parents. She was pressured from all sides, by her sister, her lover, her uncle, and all this was under the guise of false love, supposedly for the good. In her past life, the sage's eye she stole was broken into pieces and buried in pieces in the wall at the border. Contrary to my uncle's promises, relations between the countries did not improve. On the contrary, a bloody battle ensued. This was the beginning of all the troubles, and in that terrible battle her only brother, her only hope and support, died. Now her new game has begun, as long as it follows her rules, when she knew all the traitors. Medea's rebirth felt not just like a rescue, but like a triumphant return from the dead. Happiness, pure and unbridled, washed over me like a wave, washing away the dirt of fear and despair. She prayed to all of Valdina's ancestors who guarded this land with their God and spirit, and thanked them for hearing her last prayer. Knowledge of the future is now her greatest weapon. She will not waste it, and she will no longer blindly trust anyone. So much needed to change right now, and she would become cold, calculating, and inevitable. The sage's eye was still intact, and she returned to the time after the fall from the horse, and the exact moment, about 17 years old. At this age, she fell from her horse while returning from tea. That day the maid Neril rushed and saved her from death, and when she woke up she found out that she had already left the palace. The maid said that she was tired of serving the worthless princess and was afraid of dying prematurely. This girl wasn't one to just leave silently, and it's quite possible she's still here. Walking down the corridor, the heroine overheard a conversation. They say that the wife is beating one of the princess's maids right now. The eccentric who refused a knighthood and went to serve the princess was straightforward, and now they decided to get rid of her under the pretext of the princess's fall. The maids discussed that it was the senior maid's decision, despite the fact that the lady had saved the princess, and everyone saw it. The lady went out to the maids to find out where her savior was, but they did not expect to see her at all. The fragile fist trembled like a leaf in the wind, and now a lot became clear to the heroine, because she knew the truth. The story with the maid Neril was also the work of the uncle, and the lady asked to be taken there immediately. Loud screams were heard in the maid's room, and the maid was trying to drive someone out. She screamed, "People can be stubborn as much as they want, and no one will know, not even her mistress, what really happened here." The maid didn't see any point in this, and warned that the girl would die like a dog anyway, and no one would protect her. The angry lady stood in the center of the room with a whip in her hands, calling the maid names, and was sure that she would not be punished. In the middle of the room, like a wounded bird, sat the maid Neril, with fresh cuts from the whip on her back, shoulders, and arms, evidence of recent torture. The maid screamed, choking with hatred and pouring out her pent-up anger on the lady. A red face, distorted with anger, hands trembling with rage, with a leather whip clutched in them. She, endowed with a tiny amount of power, reveled in cruelty like a drunkard in good wine, and the whip in her hands cut through the air. A sharp swing, and someone grabbed her wrist, and no one had rushed to intervene in something like this before. Even in the mad gleam of her eyes, one could see a shadow of fear of losing this power. Lady Medea entered the room, breaking the scene of cruelty, and her appearance was so unexpected, so imperious. Neril was silent, not from fear, although it undoubtedly swirled somewhere deep inside, but rather from fatigue, from the indifference that was eating away at her soul. The maid, frozen with a whip in her hand, looked like a pitiful and frightened mouse that suddenly saw a cat. Medea swung her whip, and bright red marks from a fresh cut appeared on the head maid's cheek. The maid asked what the mistress was doing, but she should have asked what was going on here. Medea the Formidable asked who allowed her to take her servant without her permission, and brazenly beat her. A lady appeared in the room and declared that it was her order that had to be obeyed. She looked at the princess without a shadow of regret or doubt, cold-bloodedly, as if nothing terrible had happened here. The lady asked why the princess decided to engage in shameless self-will when she had no right to do so. The maid looked at the lady in the hope that she would now be protected from the princess's arbitrary rule. This lady was the head maid, and she appeared as if on command, while the maid was glad to see her. The head maid's name was Quijan. She had worked in this house for a long time and kept everything in order. In exchange for becoming her uncle's hands and feet, along with the management of the palace, she took a position where she can run the inner palace as she pleases, and this vile woman will not rest until she brands the princess. The lady warned the princess that she had just gotten out of bed and should not overexert herself. She asked the other maids to escort the princess to her room, where she belonged. Princess Medea was not going to let this go. She declared that while she lay in ignorance, her maid was being beaten here without a fair trial. She wanted to know since when there had been arbitrariness in the royal palace, without any investigation into the situation. The head maid sighed and asked the princess not to speak words that would hurt her feelings. And supposedly the girl Neril not only served negligently, but also brought it to the point that the princess almost got hurt. She insisted that she had only fulfilled her duty to serve the house of Valdina, and even such a punishment was too lenient for her. Lady Quizen admitted that she needed to exercise more patience, and that the princess still needed a lot of guidance. She once again asked the maids to take the princess out of the room, but Medea, when she listened to her, found something strange. Quizen pretended not to understand what the princess was talking about. To serve Valdina was to serve the king, and the princess asked if, of all the blood-bearers in the palace, her loyalty was directed to him. The anger in the headmaid was impossible to miss, and a terrible tension hung in the room. Of course, it was about serving King Peleus, so why couldn't the headmaid answer the obvious question? She glared angrily at the maids who began to whisper right behind her back, and everything was too suspicious. For some reason, the headmaid could not admit that she was supposed to serve King Peleus, and perhaps there was a spy right in this room. She was afraid to say here, her master is the king, because in reality she served a completely different person. And looking into her eyes, the princess asked if it was really such a difficult question that she could not see it that way. Quizen began to justify herself, as if she was simply confused by such an obvious question, and admitted that her lord and his majesty was the king of Pelée. Medea asked why she then treated the servant girl whom the king had left to her in this way. And does she really think that an innocent girl harmed the princess herself, when she wasn't even aware of what happened? Truth had to prevail. The princess asked to swear allegiance to the only lord, the king. And this girl turned out to be much smarter, more self-confident, and the headmaid understood that right now she could make a huge mistake. Her anger flared like a match, but she had no choice. There were other maids here too. She didn't know why the princess suddenly started opening her mouth, but she decided to shut her up. Having apologized for her insolence, she stated that she did not understand the point of this conversation, and that the princess was not her master. The Queen Mother's cries still rang in the lady's ears, and when she was little, she was blamed for a terrible death. Allegedly, it was little Medea who was to blame. The Queen's son died, and that funeral became a terrible memory for her. Many people, the whole country, wept bitterly and suffered, and all were supposedly killed by the same grief. The maid assured them that she was one of them, and if it were not for Her Highness, they would not have had to experience this terrible sorrow. If it weren't for the princess, she would still be serving the late king, and there would be no need to leave the inner palace maids so harshly. She stated that it was too obvious who had caused the terrible tragedy that had befallen the late king, and that the one who was here only by the grace of her brother was now trying to act like a mistress. The maid knew that the Queen Mother hated this girl, and the king was no exception, and why did he never return after the coronation? Quizen was confident. She put the princess in her place and asked the junior maid to continue to follow the instructions. Medea had no intention of giving up. Quizen had always been a nobody to her. While the evil headmaid Quizen ordered Neril to be beaten, Princess Medea seemed to come to life, turning from a statue into the embodiment of rage. Medea's words were quiet, but the steel in them was clear, and she asked the headmaid to lift her skirt. She stopped a step away from Quizen, and she involuntarily backed away, feeling the full weight of the princess's gaze on herself. Holding a long cane in her hands, the princess promised to respect her and not say another word about her maid. But a very entertaining spectacle will unfold. On the one hand, she will instruct Neril, and on the other hand, she will instruct her. The headmaid couldn't believe that the young princess was really trying to beat her with rods right in front of everyone. The rule here was that if palace servants neglected their duties, the king could punish them. The princess showed the royal ring, and in the absence of the king, the right was completely transferred to her. The right passed to the representative appointed by him, and it was the princess who occupied the main role. She put a ring with the royal seal on her finger. Everyone recognized it. It was this ring that her brother had once left her. The maid said she had never heard of such a rule, and when the late king was on campaign, the regent made use of this article. An article to severely punish the palace administration if any of them dare to disobey or act arbitrarily. The princess smiled and asked if an older woman like her really didn't know this law. Before she could respond, Medea repeated the order more firmly, accompanying it with an icy gaze. The headmaid froze, not understanding the meaning of what she heard: mockery, ridicule. Medea ordered the youngest maid to carry out her orders and not stand there like a stone mountain with bulging eyes. Quizen slowly began to lift the hem of her dress and was sure that the princess still did not have the courage to do it. She knows better than anyone what kind of treatment awaits her if she speaks out against her, but the princess didn't care, and one could say she went crazy, waving her long cane. She hit her legs with all her might. The headmaid couldn't hold on, but that was only the beginning, and it was too early to fall. For the first time in her life, Lady Quijin was punished for her crimes, and justice was served. The princess picked up the maid Neril and led her out of that terrible room into the corridor where the sunlight illuminated them. Her whole body was covered in bloodstains, and the girl asked why the princess was doing all this for her. She only asked her not to be stubborn and to lean on her shoulders because her legs were giving way from the pain and she could not walk. Everyone knew that the senior maid held the palace in her hands, and she would certainly try to take revenge on the princess. Neril was worried that a terrible punishment could await her, but the lady only quietly asked for forgiveness in response. Neril did not understand why the princess was behaving this way and tried to figure out what motivated her. A thin stream of tears flowed down the princess's cheek, and she confessed that everything happened because of her, and it was only because of her that the maid was punished. In her past life, Neril did not leave the palace because she served her faithfully and devotedly, but everything turned out tragically. She died defending her mistress and asked why she had endured the blows and not fought back against the head maid. How could she not have understood before that in this huge palace there was at least one person who valued her, and why did she not know that Peleus was trying to protect her? After her rebirth, the princess knew a lot, and her personal maid was truly her only friend. She hugged the girl tenderly and promised that such horror would never happen again. Medea was ready to protect her at the cost of her own life just to keep her alive and safe. If it weren't for all this horror with the reincarnation, the maid Neril, unfortunately, would soon have been dead. The next day, in the area of the capital of Valdina, an urgent message arrived at one of the castles. The knight joyfully opened the door of his office and informed his master that important news had finally arrived. Today's interesting topic was about the royal palace of Valdina, and the young man told how the senior maid was flogged by the princess herself. It seems the senior maid wanted to kick out the princess's maid, who was a student of the commander of the royal guard, and for some reason she caught the eye of the regent. The young man laughed, the head maid called the princess's maid, and the princess punished the head maid, and they say she fell from one blow. A respectable gentleman with dark hair and pale skin asked if there really was a princess in Valdina who was capable of such a thing. No one had dared to contradict the head maid before, and this rumor quickly spread to other areas. The young man said that the only sister of the current king, they say, was cursed, and even killed her parents. It was about 10 years ago, and the story of the cursed princess was simply heartbreaking. The story went that the former king and his wife went to battle together, and the battle was going in Valdina's favor. They were almost winning. But the little princess, left alone, wrote a letter that she missed her parents. The hearts of the king and queen wavered, and they immediately went to their daughter. On the way to Valdina, they were attacked by assassins. All died a horrible death, and of course the battle was lost. The whole country plunged into an incredible speed, and they say that after this the queen mother took on the 7-year-old girl like a cat on a mouse. For a long time, everyone kept saying that the cursed princess was to blame for everything, and if it weren't for her, the king and queen would still be alive. Tom chuckled at how much fuss had been made over one little child, and was it all really true? He stated that this was empty talk, and no one had ever seen a real curse. The young man could not understand the gentleman's reaction, and was sure that everything was not so bad yet. It was this pale-skinned youth who knew what a real curse was, and it had been going on for 3 whole years. 3 years of torment from this damned petrification, and as befits the servants of the dark god, the curse was truly terrible. The black devil appeared in this world, and when the Lord tried to kill him, he swore that the great primordial darkness would never spare him. The devil screamed, the blood in his veins froze cold like his gaze, and his heart turned black and hardened like his head. And even if his brilliant talent and ambition defeat all the warriors, darkness will flow through his veins until the end of his days. This man never believed in curses. He was a warlike knight, and he had to kill this demon. As soon as he grabbed the hilt of the sword, dark magic began to whirl around his hand. The knights tried to stop the commander, but he only wanted to kill the devil, whom he had been looking for a long time. Then the devil said that he would not be able to stop the decay of his flesh and would suffer until the end of his days. The country was famous for its brave warriors, but no one understood why. Even with such excellent cavalry, the state was in decline. One way or another, the princess that everyone hated seemed to have woken up, and it was interesting to see if she would last until the very end. The young man suggested introducing the eye to the princess's chambers. Nothing funny had happened there for a long time, and the young man laughed, wondering if he had really found the priestess who would remove his curse. After meeting the devil, he tried to find a way to remove the terrible curse, but no one could track down the priestess. The last place where she was seen was Valdina. The trail ended at the border, and it is not easy to look for a person from a long-extinct family. He ordered the knight to comb all the borders without missing an inch, and she must definitely be in this palace. Leaving the office, the young man warned the gentleman that this week he had to go out to court, and he should not forget, I hope, his mask. The gentleman did not like to cover his face, but in his situation there was no other way to live. From then on, he carefully concealed his identity and never showed his face in society. It was a shame to hide this incredible face behind a mask, and even the gentleman considered his appearance to be the best. He swung his dagger and asked the young man not to talk anymore, but rather to go and carry out his orders. To make his point, the gentleman threw a sharp dagger right at the door so that the young man would not relax any longer. After much torture, the princess ordered that Narelle be given a separate room where she could recover. Medea visited her constantly and tried to be as close as possible to make sure that she was okay. This morning she came into her room early and approached her bed while the girl was fast asleep. She needed to recuperate for a long time, and to do this she had to stay in bed and not get out of bed. The wounds were severe, but it was good that nothing was broken, and soon the lady would be able to continue swinging her favorite sword with ease. She was the first one the princess found in this huge palace, and she felt that she was not alone. It was her personal maid who was the only one who was always on her side, her support and safety. Medea was ready to do anything to protect her so that a terrible tragedy would not happen. The princess had to completely redesign the princess's palace and look carefully at every room. Standing next to her personal maid's bed, she heard loud footsteps that could not be confused with anything else. A lady with bright red lipstick and fiery red hair burst into the room and shouted something at the princess. The lady was indignant that she had done anything wrong at all and had only conveyed the princess's words, and she was probably very angry. She made a noticeable noise in the room, and the princess understood that the first person to be removed was her senior servant Maria. The lady screamed. The princess herself said to turn to the headmaid. She was also at that tea party and knew that the princess loved justice, and the headmaid hit her. Moreover, when she returned, she discovered that her room had been given to Narelle, who was lying unconscious on the bed. Her wounds must have been painful, and the princess quietly offered her to take some medicine and treat her wounds. Maria seemed surprised by her mistress's behavior and even fell silent for a moment. Medea asked if she really needed to apply the ointment herself, and the maid could easily do it herself. The girl seemed not to understand what was happening, and until now she had not enjoyed the princess's favor only because she was the wet nurse's daughter. Maria never dressed like a servant and always behaved impudently, but Medea always forgave her misdeeds. She considered Mary her only confidant until she sold her out to the rebels during the rebellion. The maid Maria said why the princess did not ask her permission, because this was her personal room. In the future, Maria would exchange her life for the position of her uncle's daughter-in-law, and now she was making a scene over the room, but the princess did not need permission to take care of her people. Her impudence knew no bounds, although Maria tried to justify herself by saying that this was not what she meant at all. The princess waved her hand and said that she had apparently completely lost her ability to think clearly, and asked her to go and rest. Maria could not stand it, and for so long the princess groveled before her and never said anything against it. Maria considered her a dirty half-breed of royal blood, half the daughter of a wandering dancer. And looking at the back of the departing princess, she did not want the royal daughter to try to tell her anything. Maria did not want to put up with what was happening and shouted loudly for the princess to stop, and even raised her hand to stop her. Long, thick red hair fell to the floor, and a deafening ringing sound rang out in the air. Maria turned around in horror, not understanding what was happening, seeing her luxurious hair on the floor. Clumps of hair flew in all directions. The princess turned around, but didn't even blink an eye at what was happening. A sharp blade touched Maria's neck. Narelle came to her senses and ordered her to immediately move away from her highness. If Maria keeps this up, her neck will be next, and she should be glad it was only her hair that was damaged. Long, luxurious hair lay on the floor, and looking at it, Maria, you couldn't believe it. Turning around, she angrily screamed at Narelle, asking if she had really gone crazy, depriving her of her beautiful hair. Holding the sword in her hands, Narelle whispered that if Maria dared to raise her hand against her highness again, everything would be much worse. She found the strength to rise from the bed, towering over the stupid maid and promising to break all her fingers if she didn't stop behaving like this. The humiliated Maria got what she deserved. Small drops of blood appeared on her neck, and she ran out of the room in horror. Narelle got out of bed to defend her mistress, assuring her that she was perfectly fine and no longer needed a long rest. This girl had a body of steel. Although due to an injury she only used her left hand, she was strong, and with such skill she could fight on equal terms, even with all the Star Knights. The princess warned that from today on the lady must serve her, and she was only glad to be back in action. Medea asked for all the maids of the princess's palace to be summoned, and it was probably at this point that a new chapter was finally beginning. Soon the maids were ready and arrived at the general meeting, appearing before the mistress. The princess began her speech. She gathered them here to redistribute responsibilities among them. The maids were now expected to take care of her dresses and her attire, and judging by their surprised looks, none of them expected this. The ladies were immediately delighted. For them this was real luck, and they say that Her Highness drove away the miserable Maria. One of the maids said that today, when she went to get supplies, something strange happened. The manager from the economic department, although there was dry firewood lying nearby, insisted that the ones she took were wet and moldy. Even in ordinary times, the maids were forbidden to enter the palace, and apparently, after yesterday's reprimand, the senior maid decided to take revenge. Now the maids understood that the mistress had really hit Quision with rods, and whether everything that had happened was really true. The princess said with confidence that the palace belonged to her, and the people here deserved respect, no matter who they were. She opened the chest with jewels, and since the head maid kept such a word, the maids would probably have a hard time now. She had no intention of bowing down to her, and if she didn't stand firm now, the head maid would feel free to dispose of lives as she saw fit. Even though the princess didn't have the strength, she didn't want to see how terribly the maids were treated, and she decided to reward them. At the right moment, she wanted to ask her uncle to settle this matter, and asked the maids to be patient for a little while. Knowing the heart of the good mistress, the maids could not tremble, and promised that no matter what the head servant did, they would serve with all their hearts. The princess smiled and thanked the servants, and today each one was rewarded. When the princess was left alone with Narelle, the lady warned that the maids were only waiting for the right moment and spreading news outside, and she had given too many gifts to these rats. This was a special move, and the princess stated that this was why they needed to be gotten rid of as soon as possible. Narelle realized that the mistress had something in mind, and the maids would probably sell the jewelry they received as soon as they left the palace. This is exactly what she was counting on. All these precious trinkets were given to her by her uncle. They were large and expensive in appearance, but there was not a drop of elegance in them, and the uncle, handing over such things, pretended to care about his niece. In reality, everything was different. He was turning her into a wasteful princess, about whom dirty rumors quickly spread. Medea didn't care what others said, because before she was just participating in this game. The rumors would soon spread, that was clear, and the princess was interested in how far her uncle could stop them. For such a service, these crude trinkets were a mere trifle to her. They had no value for her. A few days later, rumors began to spread throughout the city. The princess's jewels appeared on the market, were sold by the maids, and people were perplexed as to why the princess had to give up her valuables. Fortunately, while the rumors were spreading, the harassment of the head maid continued relentlessly. She acted covertly, and the tongues of the maids, who had filled their pockets with jewelry, turned out to be much sharper than usual. The royal palace, which was supposed to be a model of honor, began to be covered with rumors of a rebellion of the lower classes against the higher ones. The public was constantly talking about how the senior servant was harassing the princess herself, and they found this news incredibly exciting. The news spread quickly. The knight immediately informed the master, and they say that the princess is really suffering greatly from revenge. According to him, the head maid was no worse than the mistress, adding sand to the food and putting incense on the bed to attract insects. The rumors among the people were even more inflated. They could be called creepy, and the master was perplexed that he managed to get his man into the palace as a princess. They said that the princess gave all her jewels to her maids just to keep her position. Everything was sold out on the market: the black sapphire, the lamb's tears, the whole series of stones that make the richest upstarts go crazy. The gentleman could not understand why the princess started such a game. Could she really have given away all the jewels? Perhaps she was naive or just stupid. Did she really think that she could make them her allies this way? There is a possibility that this girl is pursuing a completely different goal and is playing her own special game. Looking at the chessboard, one could understand a lot, and how unexpectedly the pawn turned into the main queen. The knight did not understand why his master decided to take such a step, because even his elephant could now be defeated. It is rare, but it happens that the weakest and most insignificant creature devours everyone in its path. There was only one question left: what was she ready to turn into, and who would she begin to devour, or would she be devoured in the future? Taking the pawn in his hands, the gentleman thought and looked at the small snow-white figurine, carved and made of ivory. If he understood the interest, it could be very interesting to watch the little princess fight against injustice. This morning, loud female screams were heard from one of the rooms of the huge castle. The girls' hands were tied, none of them understood what was going on here. Two maids were sitting on the ground outside the castle, tied with a thick rope, completely immobilized. But they didn't understand why. Suddenly, early in the morning, they were lifted out of bed, tied up and simply thrown out of the palace. There was a lady standing in front of them. She was screaming after what they had done. Could they really still speak? And from today on, they no longer belonged to the princess's palace. Many maids of the royal palace saw with their own eyes how they conspired and deceived Her Highness. They allegedly then blamed everything on the headmaid, but the ladies shouted that it was all nonsense and a blatant lie, and that they were not guilty. The girls were screaming. The headmaid wanted to take them away from the royal palace, and the princess didn't even suspect anything about it. The lady could no longer hear their loud cries. She grabbed her head and was sure that she had the right to administer justice. The princess immediately appeared on the threshold and asked what was going on here and why the girls were tied up. The lady bowed before the princess and understood that she must have suffered for a long time while she endured these dirty tricks. Belatedly, Mrs. Quision sent them to rectify the situation, and these impudent girls constantly sowed discord between the princess and the head maid. For insulting the royal person, they will have to be executed, and the princess admitted that they tried very hard. Smiling, the lady warned that if the head maid herself had chosen them, then there was no doubt about her decision. She asked the girls to remember what they had just seen, and if they were unfaithful to the mistress and behaved like a rat, they would also be dragged to their deaths. The princess ordered her gratitude to be conveyed to the head maid, and everything seemed to be going according to her plan. The lady turned around and said softly, "Only thanks to the head maid she didn't have to get her hands dirty in this dirty story." The smile was mixed with arrogance and power, and even the lady felt a chill run through her body. The thought immediately came to her mind that she had used the head maid to have the maids executed, but no one knew if it was true. Some of the maids were expelled from the royal palace, and indeed other people did this for the princess. Looking out the window, she watched everything that was happening, and at that moment, Narelle approached her. She quietly asked if the princess knew that the head maid would do just that, and that the girls would face inevitable punishment. There was no point in hiding the truth, and the lady admitted that she understood everything she was doing and what she was getting into. The nobility, suddenly deprived of spies in the princess's chambers, will now begin to fear the uncle, and he, in turn, will begin to suspect the head maid and other rivals. Who then would their uncle's wrath fall upon? The nobility, or perhaps the head maid, but certainly not the princess. So Medea was deliberately going to pit them against each other, and Narelle noticed that she was not at all like the princess she had known before. Medea used to trust everyone. She was quiet and calm, but no one knew what happened in her life and why everything changed. The princess smiled and admitted that the previous princess was no longer there, and now she would use her power. Having been on the threshold of death, she realized something: you can't remain stupid and naive forever, being the daughter of royal blood. Now it remained to be seen whether Narelle would like the new, completely different mistress. In response to her question, Narelle fell silent. She could not find the right words, because Medea was always different. She looked down and remembered what a princess she used to be, how she trusted everyone and was so cheerful. Her Highness, in her memories, was more pure of soul than dangerous, and Narelle only wanted to protect this purity forever. Before her stood a powerful Lyri, playing by her own rules, who dealt harshly with all offenders. Perhaps she was the same kind princess, with a radiant smile on her face, and kneeling before her mistress, she promised to serve her. Whatever she was, the lady promised to remain by her side forever, and placed the princess's hand on her forehead as a sign of respect and reverence. Their union was unbreakable, both in the past and in the future, and only they could trust each other in this terrible place. The princess was incredibly happy to find a loyal ally in such a complex and unexpected political game where everything would only become more confusing. The princess had seen her uncle and head maid to her heart's content in her past life and knew perfectly well what they were thinking and what they were going to do. She could predict their every move, but something still made her wary. The sound of breaking porcelain echoed throughout the room, and the shards of the cup flew in all directions. The maid Maria stood in front of the princess, and she sighed as if she did not do it on purpose. The lady asked for forgiveness, as if her hand had slipped. She was going to pour tea for the princess, and this was something unknown that Medea had not yet encountered. When the maids were captured, Maria cleverly hid and survived, and now she is afraid of repeating their fate, so she tries to earn her favor. She prepared berry tea, the perfect temperature, and thought that the princess should be pleased with her behavior. Seeing the dark blue color of the tea, she remembered the foul-smelling poison, which was exactly the same color, and said that she didn't want any right now. From dawn onwards, Maria had been picking berries, getting her knees soaked, and presented a mug of the aromatic drink to her mistress. Horrible memories flashed through the princess's mind as the bitter and poisonous taste slowly flowed down her throat and her face was held tightly. Verna's loud voice, the smell of the damp dungeon echoed in her memories, and the voice of little Leia, whom she never saw. She couldn't bear to see the horrible blue color of the tea, so the heroine swung and hit the mug with all her might. It seemed that her words flew past Maria's ears. The princess was indignant, wondering how many times she had to repeat the same thing. Frightened by the princess's cold-blooded anger, Maria fell at her feet, begging for mercy. The princess ordered another maid to take Maria away immediately, and she knew perfectly well that it was useless for her to do anything to earn her trust. Mary screamed. It was her fault, and asked the princess not to be angry with her anymore, and she understood how terrible her situation was. Neril ran into the room to check if everything was okay with the lady, and she was incredibly worried. Medea clutched her head, remembering that terrible night when she died in a cold, dirty dungeon. A cold shiver ran through her body, an unbearable shudder ripped through every cell, and she bit her lips to contain the terrible sensation. Her voice trembled violently, but she tried to pull herself together and turned to her personal maid with one question. The princess ordered that Maria be kept under surveillance, or rather, that she be watched over her every step and action. Today Medea noticed an unusual bracelet, which she definitely couldn't have woven herself. As the maid fell to the floor and covered her head with her hands, the princess saw a marvelous jewel on her wrist. Tubular flowers, a bracelet with a pattern that in the imperial house is given only to the chosen ones, and it's surprising how it appeared in the hands of an ordinary maid. Maria had no idea that through her own stupidity, she had revealed some secrets about herself that would work against her. That same evening she went outside the royal palace, and now the princess was sure that Maria could become good bait for her further goals. A dark night fell over the cozy streets of the city, and the sky was strewn with stars today. This was not the first night that Maria had secretly left the palace, and today she set off along a rather well-known route. Turning the corner, she opened the doors of the house, and there someone was already waiting for her, anticipating their meeting. Maria was incredibly happy to see this man. The young man's name was Simon. She missed him incredibly. It was the younger Duke Claudio, Lord Simon Claudio, and every night they met in secret, keeping their most terrible secret. The young man asked what had happened. They said that all the maids had been replaced, and the princess had suddenly dismissed her, and he probably didn't expect to hear that. Simon asked rudely what she meant, and whether she was no longer Medea's close confidant. The girl said that when all the maids were changed, she was incredibly afraid, even the senior maid herself. Now the princess supposedly values her again, and she assured Simon that the princess still relied on her and she trusted her. With the head maid, both inside and outside the palace, there was growing commotion, and Simon's head was simply splitting. Simon grabbed her hair boldly and declared that if the lady wanted to marry him, she should behave prudently. He ordered that no reason be given to her to abandon the idea of making a commoner his wife, and that Maria should remain his cousin's favorite servant. Maria promised to try and follow the princess's every step, so that their love would last forever. She hardly understood that there was no place for any selfless and pure love here, only cold calculation. She wanted to hear words of love every day. She idolized her beloved Simon, but she didn't even know how cruel the whole truth was. Simon gave her a passionate kiss, and every time, just for him, she was ready to do anything. False promises, false oaths, and the darkness of their terrible secret, in which her precious bracelet shone brightly. Maria reciprocated his feelings and was sure that Simon simply had to stay by her side, no matter what it cost her. The words of love they gave each other did not promise anything beautiful, but she believed that for her sake, he could change. Tonight was especially mysterious because none of them suspected that they were already in the line of sight. That same night, Nerel informed her mistress that she had seen Maria, who was secretly meeting with the young Duke Claudio, and if Maria's bracelet is a gift from the Duke, then the House of Claudio maintains ties with the imperial family of the Kazan. The princess decided to simply observe for now and not jump to conclusions, since they needed more detailed information. Medea asked the lady where her mentor, Marquise Gillyfoss, was now. As far as she knew, the mentor was staying in a small mansion outside the royal castle. And is the princess really going to meet him personally? Medea confirmed that Valdina still needs his help. The House of Claudio did not simply come into contact with the imperial family, and each had their own benefits from this connection. Simon doesn't even realize that the bracelet he gave her was intended only to turn Maria's head. He simply wanted Maria to serve him, but this private bracelet has now become evidence of a secret conspiracy between the Duke and the imperial family. The princess's uncle seems to think that now that the Marquis has gone off to wage war, the perfect moment has arrived to seize the throne. Neril was surprised that the lady really wanted to say that Duke Claudio was preparing a huge rebellion right now. The Emperor of the Empire does not want Valdina to grow stronger, and the Marquise went to war, risking everything, just to escape the tenacious hands of the Empire. So, both the Empire and Medea's uncle have one common enemy, and that is her own brother. In a past life, Valdina was hit by an unusually harsh winter. The Empire promised food aid, but at the last moment, under a false pretext, refused. All the anger and accusations of the people fell upon King Pelias, and a terrible rebellion broke out among the people. It was a staged rebellion against the people, led by false traitors sent by Claudio. It seemed that the Empire was not at all afraid of the consequences, but no matter how powerful the state, they did not dare to encroach on the king of another country. Smiling, the princess said that it was therefore up to them to prevent a terrible tragedy. And the Marquis, now called the former captain of the guard and a hero, will be able to help them. The lady asked to prepare a secret meeting with Marquis Gillyfoss, and Neril understood how terrible things could turn out if they did not intervene. And only Medea could do something, help her people, and in this life she knew much more than in the last. She was ready to do anything to ensure that these vile people never crossed that wall alive and started a rebellion. Soon the princess met with Her Highness the Duchess, and their last meeting was too long ago. The lady asked not to be called that formally, and she even felt a little offended, since they had a warm, friendly relationship. The Duchess was frightened when she heard that the princess had fallen from her horse and asked for forgiveness for coming to visit her so late, and that she herself had recently gone to bed from fatigue from the journey. Today she met with the venerable Duchess Catherine Claudio. Suddenly a female voice was heard in the room. It was her daughter. For the first time after her death, her rebirth, Medea heard this painfully familiar voice, which laughed maliciously throughout the dungeon. It was the young lady Verna, and when she saw her sister she asked loudly if she could not understand their circumstances. Verna greeted the princess and persuaded her mother to take her with her to spend time with her beloved friend. A chill ran down Medea's spine, and she admitted that she also missed her beloved sister. Before her stood the enemy of her family and her homeland, whose image was burned into her bones. When the heroine remembered about Leia and Liana, she wanted to tear these people to shreds right then and there, but now was not the best time. Slowly and methodically, she decided to tighten the noose around their necks, so that one day she could grab them by the throat. And this will continue until the very moment when the vile Verna experiences the most terrible pain, despair, and fear, more disgusting than death itself. The Duchess asked if the princess was feeling well after falling from her horse, and even brought a doctor with her. She did not dare to let him in without asking. He was waiting outside the palace gates, and warned that if the lady did not mind, she would order him to enter. It certainly wasn't normal to let a doctor from another country into the palace, and the princess asked if her aunt would be as calm if her daughter found herself in the same situation. The lady admitted that she would like the Duchess to treat her like her own daughter, but unfortunately, she will never become a real daughter. Waving her snow-white handkerchief, the princess said that this brought her deep sadness and asked the Duchess to leave. Catherine was puzzled as to why the lady had thrown down the white handkerchief and was throwing her out, and asked her to just talk. This was the first step for the Duchess to understand that something strange was going on in her plans, and the princess silently left the room. Catherine screamed at her daughter. She was sure it was all because of her, and why on earth did she let her tongue loose? Until this moment, the Duchess thought that the princess was already tamed enough, but apparently, everything they did was not enough. It was impossible to allow the beast they were raising to escape now, because this beast could easily ruin all the plans. Catherine decided to start by punishing the head maid as a warning to the others, so that others would also understand what they should not do. That same night, Maria was in Medea's room and she needed to do something dirty. She was recently ordered to plant something in the princess's clothes and was happy to do any dirty work. She held in her hands a handkerchief with a personalized embroidery, which was destined to become the center of a huge scandal. The handkerchief smelled incredibly disgusting, and Maria even turned away as if she was covered in toad slime. She needed to bring Etienne together with the princess, and the main thing was that the maid was a truly cunning woman. Count Larc Etienne, a third-generation hereditary nobleman and minister of the interior, wielded enormous power. This man was a large figure, called the right hand of the regent, but he was so greedy and vile that the very sight of him simply made you sick. Together with the head maid, they decided to hide his personalized handkerchief in the closet of her bedroom, and they were sure that this would be the end for the princess. In the near future, this will become the most important hot gossip in the palace, which will quickly disgrace Medea's honor. Maria was sure that it served her right. If a scandal broke out with this man, even if he was 3 times the Blood King, she could forget about marriage forever. When she put the scarf in her closet, strange memories came flooding back to Maria, because once upon a time, everything was different. There was a time when these girls were on good terms, but at some point everything changed dramatically, and now she was going against her. They say the princess turned her away, and now she washed the floors with the younger maids, and the silly Neril took her place. And the head maid insisted that Maria really thought that the reagent would abandon only her, since she too should think about how to survive. Having learned about this plan, Maria was afraid, from the royal family, and was the head maid really not afraid of punishment at all? She promised that if everything ended successfully, she would help Maria enter a noble family. Kvizin said that her husband's nephew still has no heir, and Maria could very well live for a couple of years as their adopted daughter and become a noble lady. All this was for the sake of becoming a noblewoman, and after that Maria would finally be able to openly be with her beloved Simon. And holding this dirty handkerchief in her hands, Maria hesitated for a moment, but she could not go against her will. Slamming the chest of drawers shut, she mentally asked the princess not to hold her back, since it was all her fault. It was her cruel revenge, and it was the princess, in her opinion, who betrayed her once good relationship and was the first to abandon her. Today Maria was noticed again. Neril was closely watching her every step, and she saw Maria in the princess's room. She reported, "Mistress, everything happened as Medea said. Last night Maria contacted the head maid. It was confirmed that she had broken into her bedroom closet and hidden something in her dresser. After Maria left, Neril found the very same hidden handkerchief and showed it to her mistress. The kerchief had the count's inscription embroidered on it, and it seemed that the chief maid of honor had really been driven into a corner. Neril could not, according to her faith, but did these worthless people really dare to do this and decide to disgrace the honor of the princess? The lady was even ready to help dispose of a couple of corpses without a trace if the princess gave such an order. Together with the minister there would be 3 of them, and then even she might not be well, but the princess valued the life and honor of Neril. It was precisely because of the lady's beneficence and kind heart that this girl was ready to give her life for her. Her faith was strong, her courage could be envied even by the most courageous knights, and the princess knew it. She seemed ready to jump up at any second, and the lady smiled sweetly, realizing her unwavering devotion. She asked Neril to take a breather. It was not yet time to punish all the villains of this story. And by the way, Neril recently said that she is excellent at hiding things, and that she has a special talent for it. The ladies decided to use this gift from the chief maid of honor against her, a handkerchief that belonged to the count. That was not all, and the princess had another trump card in her pocket, which she was going to use skillfully. In her hands, she held the very bracelet that she had seen on Maria's hand when she fell on her knees before her. The new maid handed the bracelet to the princess, Maria dropped it, and the lady gave it to her, since this thing clearly did not belong to her by rank. Perhaps it should be returned to its owner, but simply giving it away was so boring, and the princess asked to wrap the bracelet in a handkerchief and throw it into Maria's things. Neril hid the scarf along with the bracelet and promised that everything would be fulfilled soon. Now the heroines decided to go somewhere, and an escort was waiting for them to the Marquise's mansion. Neril's comrade should already be waiting by the carriage, and that is to say, he was also a student of Marquis Gilif's, like her. Neril said that the young man can be a bit cheeky, but he is very talented, and she was sure that the lady would definitely like him. The ladies left through a secret entrance to remain unnoticed, and so that no one from the royal palace would know of their departure. A young man met them at the gate and admitted that he had not thought that he had seen a person of royal blood using a secret exit. Usually the knights used it to sneak into the city, and they were met by a very pleasant young man. Well, he was indeed very daring, but that didn't make him any less talented. The young man greeted the princess and confessed that he had already thought that his girlfriend had dug a new hole to get out. It seems to me that this was a big problem for her, and Narelle was indignant the young man stands before Her Highness. She asked him to observe the rules of decency at home, and if she came with the princess, this does not mean that he can behave so impudently. The two seem to have a very interesting relationship, and Tom smiled slyly. Narelle called him a little rascal, and they behaved like real children. Although these were just small potatoes compared to the accusations and contempt that the princess had endured in her past life, and these were simply childish pranks. She admitted that everything was perfectly fine when the lady had already grabbed the impudent young man by the collar to teach him a lesson. Medea bowed and said that she was very glad to meet him and hoped for his help on the way to the estate. This is precisely why he came here, to escort the princess to the marquis and ensure a completely safe journey. Narelle carefully offered her hand to her mistress so that she could enter the carriage in which they were to travel to the meeting. The meeting was supposed to be a significant event for the princess and would largely determine the course of her future actions. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, illuminating the small town where the Marquis of Gillyfoss was located. He stood looking out the window and waited for the princess to arrive, about whose meeting he had been warned long ago. The beginning of the journey was quite smooth and calm, but it wouldn't have been such an amazing adventure if something hadn't happened. Suddenly the carriage shuddered, and Tom realized that they had hit some rock fragments with their wheels, which had become an obstacle. He stopped to check what had happened, and was surprised to find that the carriage wheel had simply fallen off. It was not a problem for him, and the young man warned Narelle that he would need time to fix the wheel. It might take some time, and the lady was unhappy, and couldn't they just get to their destination in peace? She was worried about her mistress and was going to tell him everything, but the princess asked her to just leave him alone. Medea carefully opened the curtain to see where they were now and saw people around. It's a good thing the broken wheel didn't catch them somewhere in the wild wilderness, and they stopped at some shelter. People were sitting right on the ground, with bandaged wounds, crutches lying around them, and these were the warriors of the battle. It seemed like the battle had dragged on for a long time, and the number of wounded people continued to grow, and this could not be changed. Some lived here with their families, while others had nowhere to return to because their homelands had been burned and plundered. Some remained here because they themselves had become crippled and simply did not have the strength or health to return back. It was a terrible sight. People lost their homes, and the princess was deeply moved by it. She saw the cruel reality happening outside the royal palace. They soon managed to reach the estate of Count Gilifs, the former captain of the royal guard of Valdina. The princess greeted the Marquis politely, and the meeting with him had been going on for a very long time. The Marquis saw her for the last time as a little girl. The time was carefree and warm, and he himself seemed to have not changed at all. Perhaps his gaze became more cold-blooded, stern, after everything that happened in his life. Like a weak fawn, she appeared before him again, and the Marquis learned that they said she had ordered the chief maid of honor to be flogged for the sake of her personal maid. At their last meeting, the Marquis assured her that people were using her for their own selfish purposes, but she should not succumb to false talk, but should listen to the cries of her people. The stupid, naive girl heard everything from her uncle, and was sure that the Marquis was simply aiming for her royal seal. At that time, Medea understood absolutely nothing about the cruel reality, and promised that she would never listen to the Marquis again. A person cannot change overnight, and the Marquis thought that she must have quarreled. The main thing is to say that she came here out of fear and uncertainty. Valdina had long since lost her true shine, and it looked like she would not shine again anytime soon, and the Marquis had no desire to return to this mud of struggle. He confidently declared that the pleasantries were over, and since the princess had come all the way here, he was ready to be honest. The Marquis had long since retired from state affairs and had no intention of returning to them, and did not think that he could be of any use to her. The princess immediately understood his position, which was not surprising given what had happened earlier. However, she did not come here for this, and stated that she did not come with the request that he probably thought. She placed a folded paper on the table. It was her fortune. Although it was not so great, she wanted the Marquis to take upon himself the creation of a settlement for retired soldiers right in the capital. This request probably sounded very strange, and the Marquis was sure that she would ask him for something again. The man was very surprised and asked why she decided to create a settlement in the capital, since she didn't even stop the carriage to remind them of her existence. There are people around His Majesty that they don't like, so the lady was sure he wouldn't notice anything, but you can't remain ignorant just because your eyes and ears are turned a blind eye. The royal family now had no resources, and the aristocrats turned up their noses, not seeing any benefit in it. Therefore, the princess had no one to entrust this matter to except the Marquis, and she trusted this man. The man admitted that there were no resources or benefits in this, and why was she willing to give away all her wealth? Placing her hand on her chest, the lady said confidently, "Because she is the rightful princess of Valdina and does only what a princess should do." The Marquis was silent for a moment, and now she saw before her not that little girl, but a self-confident lady. In a past life, over long years of hunger and deprivation, people's anger accumulated drop by drop, and eventually this anger turned against their homeland, and the heroes who fought for the country became rebels. The princess had to do everything to ensure that they did not have to join for survival, and she could have asked the chancellor about this. This man does not worry about his soldiers as the Marquis does, and she trusted only him. The princess believed in his sincere concern for the people, and the Marquis was the only one who could help. She knew she was asking for a lot, and the request might seem crazy or naive, but in her heart there was a glimmer of hope for his wisdom and nobility. Marquis Gillyfoss, having listened to her story, fell into deep thought. The right choice could prevent bloodshed and strengthen the position of the crown. The wrong one could lead to chaos. The responsibility was enormous. His decision could influence not only the fate of the princess, but also the future of the entire kingdom. After the meeting, Neril asked the lady if she was sure that everything was in order and that she had made the right decision. Without a shred of doubt, the princess replied that perhaps she would be able to achieve what she wanted. Neril herself did not know what would be right. The care of the soldiers lies on the shoulders of the royal family, but the princess spent her own money on it. Medea smiled and asked if she was afraid that she would be left penniless, although for her it was not at all important. In the future, it could look like this Valdina is getting stronger, the princess is broke, and her personal maid is feeding her. For some reason, even this joke resonated with great pain in my heart, and there were no answers to all the questions yet. Perhaps it was the princess's aloof behavior that was to blame, as if her own well-being meant absolutely nothing to her. The lady inquired about the situation regarding the scarf and bracelet, and everything had already been carried out according to her orders. This means that everything will start soon, and perhaps chaos has already begun in the palace, and the scarf and bracelet have been found. Something had indeed already happened in the royal palace, and the Dowager Queen was beside herself with the news. Holding the belief with trembling hands, she asked Mrs. Quision to say again what she had just told her. The lady stated that something was found in the princess's bedroom, and this handkerchief belonged to Count Etienne. Lowering her head, Quision admitted that it seemed that love had finally come to Her Highness the Princess. The queen screamed, "This is real shamelessness, and it was a question of honor of the great royal family." She ordered that Princess Medea be brought to her immediately, and Quision was already anticipating her grand victory. Today, the queen was definitely not going to just let this go, and wanted to find out what really happened. Her Highness Princess Medea arrived to the queen at the first call, and she understood perfectly well what was about to happen here. Bowing warmly, the lady greeted her grandmother in a gentle voice, who was beside herself with anger. The queen waved her fan and ordered the princess to kneel down, because the senior maid of honor had just reported to her about the handkerchief that had been found. The queen could not allow the honor of the royal family to be disgraced, and Medea did not even flinch when she heard her cries. The lady spoke loudly, couldn't she hear her, and she ordered her to ask forgiveness for her actions. The princess was ready to do as her grandmother commanded and knelt before the respectful lady. She looked at the queen with surprised eyes and confessed, however, she would like to know the reason for such sudden anger, and such rage could harm her health. The queen said, "Does she really not understand what is being discussed and still dare to pretend in front of her?" The chief maid of honor just confessed that the princess had been secretly having an affair with some man. The duchess stood nearby, and she knew perfectly well that there definitely could not be any men near Medea. The princess's marriage was an important piece in the chess game, and Catherine kept a close eye on it to ensure that no annoying gnats dared to approach it. And if you think about it, she only had one suspicion, but she would have known about it a long time ago if it were true. She looked angrily at the head maid, and was sure that this was her doing, and she got involved in something that I did not ask her to do. Quision stood majestically and unwaveringly, as if she had not taken part in this at all, but the duchess suspected her of secret passages. When Quision learned of the princess's secret walks, she allegedly even tried to silence her, even going so far as to spread rumors that she was oppressing her. As a loyal subject of Valdina, she could not close her eyes to the whole truth, and pointed to Maria, calling this girl her witness. Mary introduced herself as the maid of Her Highness the Princess and bowed low before the Queen. She said the princess always took her with her when she secretly met with her lover, and even she allegedly told her that it was wrong. Sitting on her knees, the princess listened to this impudent lie, and Mary begged the Queen to spare her. The further it went, the more beautifully the events unfolded, in the Queen's opinion, and she could not believe that all of this was already true. In front of her stood two people who both assured her of the same thing, that the princess had a secret lover, and what's more, provided evidence. The Queen was simply furious, and of course it was the Count himself who was being talked about, and not some gentleman. Mary wanted the princess locked up in a convent for the rest of her days, so that her game would finally be over. Enjoying her victory, Maria felt the presence of the princess, and she only wanted to take revenge on her for once, driving her away first. Medea replied that even if she was truly guilty, she was ready to meekly accept any punishment. However, there is a curious coincidence here, which the Queen probably doesn't even know about yet. The head maid is the one who recently punished her for violating the rules of the royal palace, and Maria is a maid of honor, whom she removed for negligence and constant problems. And could these two girls really tell the truth? And all that remained was to hear the opinion of the Queen herself. Quijan could not restrain herself and stated that the Queen was really ready to deny it, even when they had clear evidence of what had happened in their hands. She grabbed Maria by the hand and asked her to confirm once again that it was she who found that very handkerchief in the princess's bedroom. It was this scarf that they named as the thing that the princess treasured so much, calling it a pledge of love from her devoted chosen one. The Queen did not want to listen to these conversations any longer and had already given the order to search the princess's chambers. The Queen asked her maid to come out so that she could finally judge whether the handkerchief had really been found in the bedroom. Baroness Pinatelli, the Queen's trusted lady-in-waiting, returned from carrying out her important mission. She always carried out Her Majesty's will without question, and this time she did an excellent job as well. The Queen loudly asked if she had managed to find the clue, the very handkerchief that everyone here was shouting about. She held that very handkerchief in her hands and admitted that it had indeed been found in the royal palace, but there was one thing. When Quijan and Maria were ready to celebrate their victory, the lady confessed that she had discovered the handkerchief of the minister of the court, L'Arc Etienne. However, the place where she found the evidence was not the princess's chambers. The Baroness confidently stated that the handkerchief was found in the room of the red-haired maid Maria, and her words sounded like a bolt from the blue. None of the traitors understood how this could happen, Maria screamed. This can't be, but it was useless for her to deny it now. The Baroness will never do as they wish, and she has just told the whole truth. A few days ago, early in the morning, the princess met with the Queen's close Baroness in a secret place in the forest and told her something. She knew some facts that could turn against this girl, and there was only one chance to take advantage of them. Medea knew of the involvement of the Baroness's father, who had been unjustly executed, and with the help of her seal she could clear his name of the pending charges. The Baroness's former surname was Sachin, and the former minister was falsely accused and executed. He was her father. Moreover, the one who framed him was the Duke. This is why the Duke was unable to win the Baroness over to his side, and she agreed to help the princess. Holding a handkerchief with a bracelet in her hands, the lady asked if they could really continue to insist that it did not belong to her. Maria certainly didn't expect to see her bracelet lying in that scarf, and the ladies were frightened when they saw the evidence. The Baroness stated that it was clear from Maria's eyes that she definitely recognized her bracelet. The bracelet definitely belonged to this maid, and even several maids confirmed that they saw her wearing it. The Baroness said that, judging by the fact that the bracelet was wrapped in a handkerchief at the time of its discovery, the Count may have presented it to this person as a gift. Maria could not have possessed such a thing on her own, and she cried out that this bracelet was not a gift from the minister at all. Without thinking, she told something about herself. Now all that remained was to find out who really gave her the bracelet. The Baroness ordered that she not even think about lying, that an ordinary maid had bought it herself, and at first glance it was clear that it was an expensive thing that could not be bought with her salary. With a trembling voice, Maria admitted that she had received this gift from another person, but she could not tell the truth. The lady insistently asked to tell everything, to name this person, because this pattern in the form of a pipe is inaccessible to anyone except high-ranking aristocrats. There was no point in lying anymore. Maria understood that now her life could come to an end. Simon's mother, the Duchess, was here, and if it came out that they were lovers, she would not leave her alone. Wanting to get to the truth, the lady asked Maria to tell everything quickly, and her time had come to confess. It was high time for the princess to tell the queen something, and she said that she had some information. The princess stated that the minister definitely had someone else with whom he shared tender, trembling feelings. Medea remained incredibly calm, and Maria, trembling all over, did not know what to say. She realized that she had really known everything from the very beginning, and that they were trapped, and Medea turned out to be the cat. She turned to the queen with the words that since Mary was so sad behind her mistress's back, it meant that their feelings for each other were very deep, and the most correct decision would be to allow Maria to marry Count Etienne so that they could finally find their happiness. Maria had no choice but to fall on her knees before the princess and queen and scream that she would never do such a thing again. She asked for forgiveness, and the princess said that she was only supporting her love and was the count not the ideal man she dreamed of. If she was really forced to marry this man, Maria knew perfectly well that it would be the end of everything with Simon. She imagined in horror what it would be like to marry this terrible man. This could not be allowed. Maria couldn't imagine a future not with her beloved Simon, but spending her whole life with this old ugly toad. Right now, death was better for her than life with a disgusting man whom she hated. She had no choice, and with tears in her eyes she admitted that in fact it was all a blatant lie. She said that the chief maid of honor ordered her to hide the minister's handkerchief in the princess's room. She said that because of her quarrel with Her Majesty, they wanted to throw her out of the royal palace, and she would lose her dignity forever. Maria swore to the truth. Kvision decided to teach the princess a lesson and asked Medea to believe her. She was blinded by the promise that she would be included in the genealogy of a noble family. She was crazy and guilty, and Kvision asked her to shut up, assuring her that she was trapped and was talking all sorts of nonsense. The headmaid tried to justify herself, saying that the girl was blatantly lying and that it was all an absolute lie. The Baroness said loudly how they dared to slander the lady, and in such a way. The whole thing was just outrageous. The queen started shaking with anger, and the whole situation was just shocking. She loudly slapped her fan against her palm to finally put an end to this ridiculous farce. The queen ordered the wicked girls to be taken away and have the tendons on both their hands cut so that they could never harm their master again. While Kvision was being led away by the guards, she was still screaming that the princess had ordered the maid to set this all up, but it was too late. She even appealed to the Duchess to confirm the false accusations, but Catherine was not in her game. Finally, silence reigned in the hall, and with a sigh the queen looked at the princess sitting on her knees. She asked if she thought she was now fully vindicated now that all the weighty evidence had been presented. Even if we forget about this incident, the queen had heard about her past outrages, how she absurdly waved the royal seal, so her subordinates stopped putting it in anything. The queen asked for the royal seal to be given back and decided that the princess had had enough of all this reckless clowning. Medea was in no hurry to follow her order. She was still sitting on the floor in front of the respectable lady, as if waiting for something. The queen angrily asked for the royal seal to be handed over, and the Duchess understood that if the princess did this, the game would be turned against her. Catherine asked her mother to calm down and admitted that she was sure the princess had no bad intentions. For a queen, Medea was still naive, so she did not know about the palace intrigues, but she did not want to tolerate this insignificance any longer, and there were ladies more worthy of her. The Duchess tried to persuade her to promise not to allow such a thing to happen again, and the lady finally changed her anger to mercy. The princess's silence tormented her. She called her a wicked girl who despised the queen, considering her a feeble old woman. She still blamed her for her son's death and asked if she too had decided to drive her to the grave with such a black heart. The seal is something that His Majesty the King personally entrusted to Medea. She knew that the queen could not simply take it away. In private they were granddaughter and grandmother, but above all he was the only king of Valdina. The queen fell silent, sighed heavily, and did not believe that this impudent girl would contradict her. Medea bowed even lower, right at her feet, assuring her that she could not go against the will of His Majesty, and asked, as the eldest in the royal family, to treat her with understanding. Medea was right. The queen had no power to countermand His Majesty's orders. However, as the eldest in the family, she could not turn a blind eye to her disrespectful behavior, and ordered her to go to the chapel, fall on her knees, and pray for repentance. The queen, whose face had become stony under a mask of feigned sorrow, ordered the princess to go to the statue of the goddess of mercy and beg for forgiveness until it showed a sign of its favor. Medea, with her head held high, accepted this order. This was just another chess game in the game for power, and to retreat now would mean admitting defeat. And so, under the watchful eyes of the idol, the merchants and the aristocrats, Medea carried out the queen's will. Everyone already knew about the punishment that the Dowager Queen had inflicted this time, and they said that the princess was ordered to repent until the goddess sent a sign of forgiveness. The speech was about that very sign that even the high priest would hardly be worthy of receiving even once in his life. This must mean that she has no intention of forgiving until she cools down, and the lady will have to sit here, in front of all the aristocrats and passers-by. With her hands folded in a prayerful gesture, she began to offer up quiet words of repentance, enunciating each word so that everyone around could hear it, and so the whole day passed until it became dark. There was no shadow of remorse in her words for something she had not done, only humility in the face of an unjust verdict. All this time Neril was next to her, but she was not even allowed to get close to the princess. The wind, piercing and biting, tousled her hair and fluttered the hem of her dress, but she stood unwavering, as if she herself had become part of the stone sculpture. Her thoughts were focused on the higher goal, on saving the kingdom, on revenge on enemies. In the darkness of the night, surrounded by silence and solitude, she felt her spirit grow stronger, her will become stronger. Every prayer she said, every suffering she overcame brought her closer to victory. She knew that the goddess was silent, but she believed that other powers would hear her, powers that patronize justice and truth. All this time, someone else was watching the princess, and the sun's rays touched the face of a young man standing in the office. It was the chancellor of Valdina, named Ciccio Emil Regis, and it was already the third day that the princess continued to sit near the statue of the goddess. When the first rays of dawn touched the princess's face, she felt hope, the fire of determination, the fire of revenge flaring up again in her heart. The chancellor looked out the window silently, but no one could interfere with the queen's order. The masked gentleman smiled and stated that the chancellor's intentions were too obvious, and he had guessed from the very beginning why she had suddenly changed the meeting place. He came here to see with his own eyes the very princess he had already heard about. Mr. Shiseo asked the young man not to talk nonsense, and that the princess's presence here was simply a ridiculous coincidence. His interlocutor did not think so, and was sure that such a thing could not be called an ordinary coincidence. Rumors about this girl have been circulating throughout the castle for a long time, and the most important thing is that she bravely goes against all the royals. They say she has been in this state for 3 days now, and apparently the chancellor is worried about her, since he constantly looks at what is happening from the window. Siseo once again informed Mr. Cesare that this was just an ordinary coincidence, and that they would be better off talking about the matter for which they had gathered here. The gentleman brought documents confirming that the Passad Guild, which trades exclusively in weapons, has recently been trying to find something in Valdina. The chancellor was ready to close his eyes, taking advantage of his power, and openly declared this to Mr. Cesare. He chuckled, and since the chancellor himself made such an offer, it definitely meant that he wanted to get something in return. The chancellor remained silent and looked intently at his interlocutor while he waited for him to state his condition. Soon the paperwork was completed. Siseo was glad that he had managed to achieve what he wanted, and he actually decided to ask for a decent amount of money. This money should be enough to improve the royal family's finances for a while, and that is the only reason the chancellor started all this. Cesare stared out the open window, beneath which the princess sat in the central square, her hands folded in prayer. He saw Princess Valdina for the first time, and he had no idea that their first meeting could be like this. All this time she did not rise from her knees, a new dawn was reflected in her eyes, but the fight for justice was only just beginning. Although her hands were shaking, the gentleman chuckled that even a newborn foal would have a much larger saddle than this fragile girl. He did not understand why she was holding on so stubbornly, and what she wanted to achieve from her ruthless grandmother, the queen, who had given such an order. Cesare remembered his past the more the emperor was wary of him and tried to tighten the leash, the more he inflamed his anger. When he was still a very young boy, he was always told what to do, and was not given any right to do as he wanted. And the secret was simple: the deeper the wound inflicted once, the stronger the compassion becomes in the future. Perhaps he partly saw himself in this girl, and he too had previously tried to prove things to many people, which was actually useless. Loud shouts were heard in the central square, and the gentleman saw a fat man approaching the statue of the goddess. No one was allowed in, but this gentleman in luxurious robes seemed to think that he was allowed to do anything here. Cesare didn't know who the big guy was approaching her, but judging by his angry mood, he was determined. Nerul warned the impudent man that approaching the princess was forbidden, such was the order of the Dowager Queen, but the man assured that he did not intend to interfere with the prayer of repentance. He gave his name, Count Etienne, Minister of the Interior of the Imperial Palace, which is why he behaved so insolently. He pushed the lady away and loudly declared that he just wanted to see the princess up close for a while, and finally he had the perfect opportunity. It seemed impossible for the minister to forbid anything, but his guards immediately seized Nerul. His insolent fat face, shiny with self-satisfaction and lust, was disgusting. He moved slowly, like a predator savoring the anticipation of prey. The Count, clearly overestimating his influence, decided that 3 days of prayer had broken the princess's spirit and extended his meaty hand in the hope of touching her. There was a greedy desire in his eyes, an undisguised intent to take advantage of her vulnerability. His thick fingers, adorned with rings with large diamonds, glittered disgustingly. However, what he did not know remained a secret until this moment. The stone, thrown by an unknown hand, whistled through the air and crashed into the Count's massive hand. He screamed in pain, his face twisted in rage, the ruby on his ring cracking as if reflecting the crack in his carefully crafted plan. For 3 days of silence and humility, as if preparing for the decisive act in a cruel play being performed at court, the Count waited for this moment. His voice, laced with the poison of anger, echoed off the marble walls. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burned with a mad fire. He looked around at those present like a predator looking for prey. Anger choked him, not allowing him to breathe. Etienne screamed, "This is definitely an assassination attempt, and someone is trying to kill him." People started whispering, wondering if someone had attacked the Count. No one understood what had happened while he desperately screamed for help. Mr. Cesare, immersed in the semi-darkness of his office, watched the scene from the window, like a director behind the scenes of a puppet theater, in his hand resting those very stones, simple tools capable of changing the course of events. Cesare sighed, his gaze sliding to Chancellor Ciceo, who stood at a distance, puzzled and, as always, not understanding the true nature of what was happening. Now the game will become more interesting. The Chancellor will perk up, and the princess, perhaps for the first time in 3 days, will raise her eyes. The stone flew right on target. The Count's cry, like a shot, tore through the silence. The rage. Cesare grinned. Cesare squeezed the stones in his hand. The game had just begun. A torrential rain fell upon the temple, and a thunderstorm with furious peals of thunder shook the ancient walls. Mr. Cesare, watching the storm from the window, remained unperturbed. Time passed, measuring the seconds filled with foreboding. His assistant, who had slipped into the office like a silent shadow, ran with an umbrella for the gentleman. He glanced at his assistant and knew that everything that was happening now was just a big game. The young man asked the boss to wait a little while to bring the carriage and asked him to take at least an umbrella, but the gentleman offered to go together. He couldn't allow even a drop of rain to fall on the scoreboard of who would one day ascend to the great throne. His partner ran through the pouring rain to get the carriage to the temple gates, promising that he would return very soon. Cesare, without saying a word, accepted the umbrella fate, playing with whimsical patterns, seemed to weave threads of power around his figure. Duty, blood pressure, necessity, many arguments spoke in favor of ascending the throne, but did he want it? This question, like a splinter, sat deep inside, poisoning the sweet moment of anticipation. As thunder rumbled in the sky, Cesare stood in the pouring rain, clenching his fist tightly, the demon-cursed man thinking that he might never actually ascend the throne. Cesare sighed, looking at the raging elements. The answer seemed to be hidden somewhere out there, in the chaos of rain and thunder. An answer that must be found before taking the next step, before accepting one's damned fate. Outside, at the very edge of the portico, the princess was still sitting, soaking wet, but motionless as a statue. Her destiny was to wait. He approached the princess, and as he watched, the voices that had once called him the cruelest man echoed in his head. His own father cursed his son, in whose veins his blood flowed. He constantly said that the boy was insatiable in his cruelty, as befits one who had destroyed his own mother. In her silent suffering he saw a reflection of his own soul, tormented by lies and betrayal. Their fates with Cesare were similar, intertwined by invisible threads of shared pain. They were both rejected by their families, both bore the stigma of guilt for a death to which they had no direct connection. It was so ironic to see her threatened by her own family, and the desire to help, to pull her out of this nightmare, grew in his heart with every minute. He knew that any rash action could have tragic consequences. The princess still held on, her hands shaking without ceasing, trying in vain to warm herself in this icy hell. She felt the cold gripping her, penetrating deep inside, freezing not only her body but her will as well. The tears had long since mixed with the rainwater, erasing the last traces of pride and defiance. From behind the temple columns, the queen's maids watched her, silent shadows, patiently awaiting her fall, the downfall of this stubborn girl. To give up, the thought pierced her mind like an icy spark. To give up and let the queen prevail, to admit defeat and submit to her will, not now. It was too early to give up. She still had faith, albeit weak, like a flickering light in the night, but still faith. Faith that justice will prevail, that the truth will come out, not after all she has endured. Her vision was blurred with helplessness, but suddenly the drops of cold rain stopped falling on her body. Someone came up and brought her an umbrella, carefully covering her with the hope she had been fighting for all this time. He opened a large black umbrella and it, like a raven's wing, covered her, protecting her from the raging elements. The princess looked up, her eyes darkened by her experiences, full of caution. She did not know who he was, the tall stranger, shrouded in an aura of power and mystery. In this palace, where intrigue and betrayal were commonplace, it was dangerous to trust anyone. A faint spark of hope for salvation, for deliverance from the nightmare in which she found herself, flickered deep in her soul. The gentleman in the mysterious mask said, "The princess put on an incredibly funny performance," and smiled reservedly. The partner ran up to his boss and screamed at him, asking what he was doing in the pouring rain next to this girl. He brought him the umbrella again and asked why he was in such a state, all wet, but the gentleman asked him to be quiet so as not to make noise. It was already the 5th day that the princess had been bowing before the statue of the goddess, and the queen had been watching her all this time. The lady didn't understand whether the girl really didn't respect her at all, and she could have simply asked for forgiveness a long time ago, and everything would have ended. Every day she kept a close eye on the princess, and was sure that she would soon have to stay. The Baroness approached the queen, wanting to express her thoughts, even though it might sound too bold. The lady admitted that she thought the princess was being so stubborn, not because she wanted to resist her. Most likely, she is forced to defend herself. The chief maid of honor is still trying to denigrate her, but the queen laughed. Was the princess really allowing the servants to overcome her? Now Medea had no one left, she had no supporters, so she had no choice but to fight alone. The Baroness was sure, on the contrary, that the behavior of the chief maid of honor seemed strange to her, and perhaps she had some other reason for going so far. Thinking about it, the queen actually found some truth in these words, and something suspicious in the behavior of the head maid. Since the chief maid of honor was the second prince's person, then in case of anything she should go to him, but why then did she come to the queen? Obviously the lady was playing her own game, but so far her highness could not figure out her plans. For this reason the Baroness conducted a small investigation into Mrs. Quision, and she already had documents in hand. The queen began to read each page carefully, and with each line she learned a new truth. Her hands began to shake from the terrible information that was written in reliable sources. All this time, the chief maid of honor had been plundering the property of the princess's palace to line her own pockets, and now the queen had found out about it. The Baroness reported that the lady had indeed had a hand in even the princess's personal belongings. Medea had noticed this, and she had deliberately staged this show. The queen screamed angrily. How dare this pathetic excuse use her to harm the princess herself, and this was simply unheard of. Suddenly the door swung open and a maid ran in, screaming loudly an unheard-of disaster had happened. She informed the queen that Her Highness the Princess had just fallen unconscious in the street, and that it was obvious that she had lost consciousness from exhaustion. The princess, her strength drained by the relentless rain, collapsed onto the cold slabs of the portico, consciousness leaving her, leaving only impenetrable darkness and powerlessness. The queen ran out of the palace, accompanied by a retinue of worried maids, to the scene of the incident. Her condition turned out to be much worse than she had heard. The queen angrily asked the maids why they had just stood and watched until it had come to this. The queen herself had given orders not to give the princess a sip of water. Now she insisted that the maids should have at least some rudiments of flexibility, and how could they be so slow-witted? The maids looked at each other. They were simply following the queen's orders, but now for some reason they found themselves at fault. She leaned over the princess's motionless body, her eyes, usually cold and calculating, filled with a strange mixture of guilt and regret. Now that the princess lay unconscious, the queen knew another truth. At that moment, looking at her stepdaughter's exhausted face, she saw not only the object of her intrigues, but also a reflection of her own lost innocence. She remembered that terrible day when she stood next to her son's coffin and could not believe that he was no longer alive. The queen ordered that the palace physician be called immediately. She was not ready for someone to die in her arms again. Now she knew the truth about how far she had gone in hatred, the truth about the destructive power of revenge, and the truth that even hardened hearts are capable of feeling remorse. The princess was brought to the royal chambers. The court physician was still not there, and a servant from the princess's palace went to find out when he would arrive. The queen felt that it was very cold in her mistress's chambers and ordered the maids to do something about it immediately. She was indignant that the maids were too cold about their work, and the lady promised to light the fireplace right away. They say that the chief maid of honor fired all the previous servants, citing that they were creating problems, and these maids seemed to have no training. Now the queen knew that Lady Quision had not given the princess a peaceful life until the very end, and that she had committed many atrocities here. Moreover, everything turned out to be completely different from what they said, and they said that the princess lives in luxury under the protection of the royal seal and the second prince. There was no trace of extravagance in her room. It was modestly furnished, as if no great princess had lived in it at all. It all looked as if this girl had been abandoned for a long time, and now the queen finally saw everything with her own eyes. Soon the maid who had been sent for the palace physician returned, but she returned alone. She greeted the queen, but the lady asked her to leave the greetings and angrily asked why she had not returned with the doctor. The thing was that the court physician was busy at the moment and could not come for an examination, but this could not be, and he simply postponed the examination of the princess. The reason was that Lady Claudio cut her finger on the edge of the invitation, and when the queen heard this, she could not believe her ears. Did the maid really say that the doctor dared to ignore the call of a royal person because of some scratch from a piece of paper? Apparently, after the death of the late king, the queen remained in grief for too long and did not pay any attention to what was happening in the inner palace. The maid begged for forgiveness on her knees, but she could do nothing. The king's only sister was being subjected to such neglect. The queen ordered that the court physician be brought again, and that not a word be said about the queen herself being here. Well, now she will have to bring order to the royal family herself, so that these people finally begin to respect royal blood. Slow footsteps were heard in the corridor, and the doctor muttered about the reason for all the fuss here. He angrily opened the door of the room and shouted that he had finally arrived and that everyone should surely be happy. The young man behaved too boldly. He said that the princess often fainted, and for some reason everyone was alarmed, as if something out of the ordinary had happened. Approaching her bed, he didn't even begin to examine her, and admitted that he should let her lie there further, since she was still breathing, and he was just being bothered over trifles. He was urgently called to the princess, and he did not want to fall into disfavor with Madame Claudio, but he did not even know that the queen was in this room. The queen began her speech. The doctor could not be reached. Now he burst into the room and allows such words to be addressed to the royal princess. The physician looked at the dowager queen in horror, and he certainly did not expect her appearance. Her Highness said, "How dare some pathetic doctor think of such disrespect for the royal family?" The man fell to his knees before her, trembling all over. He was guilty and begged for punishment, and many feared the queen's wrath. The lady said that since he wanted to die so much, she would gladly remember his last wish. One wave of her hand was enough to decide the fate of people. She promised to severely punish the impudent man for insulting the royal family and to deprive him of the title of physician. He was captured by guards, and the queen ordered that his entire family be banned from setting foot in the capital for life. The queen's head ached from the cries for mercy. She sighed heavily, but it simply had to be done. After she stopped looking after the palace, all the servants of this place behaved too insolently towards the royal family. The queen couldn't even believe that the princess's authority had fallen so low after the king died. Night fell, and myriads of stars, shimmering with cold light, scattered across the velvet canvas of the sky. The queen's usually commanding gaze seemed to seek comfort there, answers to unspoken questions. The queen stepped out onto the moonlit balcony and looked into the bottomless sky. She understood that the princess's condition was worsening with each passing moment. The Baroness tried to calm her down, noticing that the queen was worried, promising that Sir Herodotus would arrive soon and take care of her. Time dragged on painfully slowly. Every minute seemed like an eternity, filled with anxiety and fear. Soaking wet and exhausted from her long imprisonment in the rain, the princess was on the brink, and yet, despite her dark forebodings, the queen refused to admit defeat. When the doctor finally arrived, he examined the princess and realized that the matter was very serious, but it was surprising that she remained in that condition for 5 days. He promised to do everything in his power and asked the queen to put her worries aside and rest a little after what had happened. In the queen's heart, behind the mask of indifference and cruelty, feelings boil: guilt, regret, fear, and now, in this dark hour, these feelings burst out. While standing outside, the ladies heard loud music coming from a nearby palace. The queen inquired what was there, and it was the cottage where Duchess Claudio and her daughter lived. The queen wondered if reality had been too cruel to the princess who lived in such desolation. Now she was lying unconscious on the bed, while the house of the side family was much more luxurious than the princess's palace. She realized all the horror that had happened during the long years she had spent in seclusion, mourning the death of her husband. The morning rays, timid and gentle, touched the window glass. The faint reflection of the sun played on the walls, coloring them with pale shades of peach and gold. She took her first cautious breath, feeling the air, cold and fresh, fill her lungs. The princess slowly opened her eyes, with difficulty focusing her gaze on the familiar outlines of the room. After everything she had been through, after the grueling prayers that left her exhausted, after the freezing rain, she was alive, her body aching, every muscle aching from the tension. Neril was delighted when she saw her mistress come to her senses, and the first thing the lady asked was how much time had passed. Neril brought her hot tea and asked if she was feeling well, but the princess still could not get out of bed. The girl's face was very worried, and she must have been very worried about her mistress all this time. The princess asked to tell what had happened during this time, and the most important news was that Mrs. Quision had recently died in prison. After the princess lost consciousness, an investigation was launched into those responsible for insulting the royal family. The Dowager Queen personally took on the task of maintaining order in the palace, monitoring every step of the servants and all the residents. Mr. Count Sissio collected important documents and actively assisted in the investigation, after which the whole truth was revealed. Even some of the aristocrats associated with Lady Quision were harshly punished, many were executed, and many had their power taken away. Thanks to this, rumors are circulating in high society that the Dowager Queen's heart has now tilted towards the princess. Many people are rejoicing, believing that the Prince Regent's influence will finally wane and that things may change in their lives. Mrs. Pinatelli was appointed senior lady-in-waiting, and everything turned out exactly as the princess had planned, but changes are rapidly sweeping even the darkest corners of the palace. The first victory had been won, and everything was finished with Lady Quision, who was the left hand of the princess's uncle. Now all that remained was to sort things out and cut off the right hand of the main villain, Count Etienne, who had remained unpunished for a long time. Before that, the princess wanted to deal with one more person and asked where Madame Maria was now. The maid suffered a rather unpleasant fate. She was in a dark, damp dungeon, shackled. The cold of the stones penetrated her bones, and the damp air permeated her clothes with the smell of mold and despair. The heavy door creaked, and Princess Medea entered the dungeon, her appearance a ray of light breaking through the thick darkness. The maid rushed to the iron grate, grabbed it by the bars, and approached the princess closely, expecting mercy. Exhausted by fear and despair, with tears in her eyes, Maria asked the princess to save her, to spare her, and to give her a chance. Folding her hands in front of her, the lady admitted she had been wrong and vowed never to betray the princess again. Before Medea's eyes, there was still a picture of how Maria insulted her in the presence of her grandmother, and perhaps it was worth avoiding the danger. Maria would forget about everything, and how could she believe her words? Medea, known for her justice and mercy, brought Mary not only light but also choice. Maria promised to fulfill her love's command, if only she would not leave her in this cold, damp dungeon, where she would die of hunger or disease. She was not here to pass judgment. Mary had committed a crime, and the princess wanted to give her a chance. She trusted Maria, but wanted to give her the opportunity to prove her loyalty to her, and she handed me a glass bottle. It was a poison that paralyzed the limbs, and if the antidote was not taken in time, the heart would stop and instant death would occur. Maria just said herself that she was ready to fulfill any order of the princess, and Medea asked her to drink poison. Was this oath also a lie? Fear and despair could not be contained, and the maid agreed to drink the poison, following the princess's order. She might die in a few minutes after taking a sip from that glass bottle. The princess knew that Maria was the lover of Simon, the young Duke Claudio, and she was ready to do anything. In order to wring Claudio's neck and punish them for betraying the royal family, the princess came up with a cunning plan. Maria will be useful again in this game, and the maid, in complete despair, drank the poison offered by the princess. Maria could choose death, painful and lonely, or she could choose to believe in the princess and have the right to freedom and personal happiness. There were two ladies in the room, Princess Medea and the maid she had rescued from prison, who was now to become a different person. After Mary drank the poison, Medea gave her the antidote, and this was her special lesson. Taking the antidote was not something she could miss, so the princess suggested that her maid come regularly for more medicine. After the gathering, the princess had to leave her chief maid, Pinatelli, who from now on served her, was waiting for her. The Dowager Queen was already expecting Medea, and today they were finally supposed to meet. The princess was ready for this conversation. A lot had happened during this time, and just as much had changed, and now it was time to take the next step. The meeting of the Queen and Princess Medea after everything that had happened was supposed to mark a new era, an era if not of peace, then at least of truce. In the spacious hall, filled with soft light, there were exquisite desserts, airy cakes, melt-in-your-mouth fruits, and chocolates on the table. Medea behaved with refinement. Her every movement was precise, her every word was weighed. The Queen, on the contrary, seemed agitated, her gaze, intent and scrutinizing, fixed on Medea. The Queen sensed that behind the outward politeness there was something more, some hidden game whose rules she had yet to understand. She began to speak first, and noted that the princess had completely recovered and was holding herself stately, although she had been unconscious just a few days ago. Smiling, the lady thanked her grandmother for her care, because it was only thanks to her and the doctor that she was now completely fine. Lady Verna was sitting next to her. She asked if she had ever managed to improve her manners, and whether she had really pretended to be clumsy in front of the etiquette teacher. The teacher sent by the aunt taught only noble etiquette, which was different from what the princess was supposed to learn. Verna was indignant. This couldn't be, because she also learned manners from the same teacher. And does the princess really want to say now that she was taught incorrectly all this time? The Queen cast a cold, contemptuous glance in the direction of the Duke's daughter, who was clearly being too rude at the moment. She had not gathered them for this purpose and admitted that for the only princess of the country, Lady Medea looked too modest. The meeting was like a game of chess, where each piece played its role, and the outcome depended on one single move that Medea had to make. The maid brought out a large jewel box and placed it in front of the girls, and the Queen asked the princess to choose something. The box contained the most exquisite jewels that belonged to the royal family heirlooms. Verna was unhappy that the Queen asked the princess to choose something, and the lady thanked her in surprise. Verna became more and more angry, and anger and hatred towards this girl grew in her soul. She was angry that Medea was now collecting all the best things when she was the most beloved granddaughter. Grabbing the box, Larry declared that if her sister couldn't choose anything, then she was ready to choose first. She was sure the Queen wouldn't say anything, but she had no idea what would happen next. The respectable lady screamed loudly. The girl was behaving too insolently and was allowing herself too much. Verna had always had everything she had for free, and holding the box in her hands, she looked at the Queen with fear. The lady stated that she had not at all said that any of these things could belong to her, but had truthfully dared to touch the princess's things without permission. The lady looked down and said, "The sister did not choose anything, and she decided that she could choose first, but did not observe etiquette." The Queen was indignant. Did she really think that because she lived in this palace, she became equal to the Valdine family, which would never happen? The lady asked to observe etiquette as a subject, since royal blood does not flow in her veins. It seemed that Verna allowed herself to be the most important thing here, and now she was surprised why her grandmother was behaving this way. She always did this, and now she wondered why the Queen was attacking her as if she was nobody here after so many years. Running out of the room, the lady declared that her grandmother was behaving simply terribly, and she was no longer prepared to tolerate her. The Queen admitted that she hadn't noticed before how stupid this girl was. Had she really spoiled her too much? The princess asked this girl to understand they lived together in the royal castle and shared everything in half their entire lives. Everything that Medea had, Lady Verna always had, so the Queen's words must have confused her, and this is not surprising. The Queen was surprised that this girl really had everything the same as the legitimate princess. Verna was only a daughter from a collateral branch, while Medea was the crown princess of direct blood, and they had completely different statuses. The princess looked closely at the jewelry, but she chose something completely different. The queen considered her choice too modest, but this particular item was to the princess's liking. Just think, the famous rare Damascus steel, this was a carved steel fan that could be used as a completely worthy weapon. The queen was surprised. The lady could have chosen the most expensive jewelry that no one else had, but she chose an ordinary fan. He was not just modest, he looked almost beggarly, and the queen was puzzled as to where the rumors about the princess's extravagance came from. A smile appeared on the girl's face. She was happy with such a gift, and if this was what she wanted, then the queen followed her will. Could Medea really have forgiven her for everything? Could she really forget the betrayal and humiliation? Or was this just a clever trick, a carefully planned revenge waiting in the wings? There were dirty rumors about the princess, and the queen wondered if young Lady Verna was the only one here who didn't know her place. But most of all, the queen was afraid that Prince Joaquin suddenly harbored dangerous thoughts in his soul, and that a cruel struggle had been going on against her for a long time. She told the Baroness that an urgent letter needed to be sent, and that it was very important. The queen is going to create all members of the royal family to understand what is going on behind her back. The gentleman slammed his fist on the table, and a furious cry tore through the silence of the office. His fist turned white with tension, and his eyes flashed lightning. An unexpected betrayal by relatives, trusted people, that's what he felt now, and could the Queen Mother really do this to him? The man learned that the queen had summoned the man who was always following his brother around, and wasn't it obvious that she was trying to discipline him? The Duchess reported that her daughter had returned in tears from her mother, who seemed to have scolded her for the way she had addressed Princess Medea. Having agreed for the head, the gentleman did not understand what had come over her lately, because the queen had always been quiet. Their mother's intervention resulted in colossal losses for them, and the trade guild through which they had been siphoning off royal funds was dissolved. But besides this, the queen threw them out of the cottage, effectively expelling them from the royal castle. The Duchess tried to calm the gentleman, but he shouted, "The curse is that the people now sympathize with the princess." He couldn't rest easy. His plan could go to waste, and his partners wrote to him to send the promised funds by the appointed deadline. The master was furious if everyone found out that it was not Princess Medea, but his throne, who was behind all this. He would face the death penalty. The Duchess insisted that they had lost their chief maid, but the Minister of the Interior was still on their side, and the inner palace was completely under their control. There was no need to worry about Count Montaga either, the lady assured them. They just had to strike first. It seemed that Catherine had some specific plan, the details of which she did not even tell him. Smiling, the lady asked, "How about throwing a lavish banquet in honor of the princess's recovery?" Poor child, she had just had to endure something lately, and she wanted everyone to see Medea, shining in gold and in perfect health. Hatred for the princess permeated her through and through, and her ally, the gentleman, admitted that this was a good idea, as always. Duchess Catherine intended to do the same as before, but now it was necessary to follow a different plan. She touched the royal family's coat of arms and told the gentleman something about her selfish intentions. Medea must become their shield, an innocent, noble maiden who will be torn to pieces by other people. Princess Medea was too clever. She held in her hands a steel fan, a gift from the queen, which cooled her palm with its flawless smoothness. The irony did not escape her notice. The weapon intended to provide coolness turned out to be a weapon, a symbol of hidden intrigues and dangerous alliances. She saw through the game like a crystal ball and prepared the next move in the fight for justice, her plan ripening gradually, like a rare flower that requires patience and care. Neril came to her and reported that she had conveyed the message to Mr. Umberto, as the princess had ordered. The lady said her brother had been too cautious, but he was more skilled than the princess had imagined, and Tom begged to be called on the next mission. Medea carefully thought out the plan, and each person played a special role in this performance. Even Neril had no idea where the princess was going to use this man. She played by her own rules, exploiting her enemy's weaknesses and strengthening her own position, but to hunt, you first need to set traps. The steel fan in her hands was not just an accessory, but a symbol of her determination, her unwavering will. It reminded her of the price she paid and the goal she was striving for. She ordered the lady to warn Tom to continue to keep an eye on the man and report everything. The hunting grounds were already prepared. She became a warrior, ready to fight to the end, and this steel fan was her weapon. Justice for myself, for my people, for those who were deceived and betrayed, and now the time has come to meet the hunter. She made an appointment with her Lord Chancellor, who bowed respectfully to the great princess. Medea was cautious and decisive, and she did not arrange this meeting without reason. Siseo sat down on the sofa and asked if they said the princess had something to say today. He understood that this might be her new conspiracy, but just recently she had gone quiet, fulfilling the queen's will. Claudio's influence was just beginning to wane. The chancellor understood that they must not miss the moment, and declared that if the princess was going to use the seals for the sake of the duchy, it would be better to abandon this idea. She may not know, but this could harm Valdina, and he insistently demanded that she reconsider her decision. That is why she decided to meet with him today, and she was sure that this meeting would play into her hands. The maid presented the lady with a mug of the drink, and the princess's blood ran cold when she smelled that aroma again. She asked what the unique smell of the tea was, and Shiseo explained that it was herbal tea prepared by his personal maid. The princess was surprised. Herbal tea must be very beneficial for health, but she remembered this smell well. The maid stood next to her, and suddenly Medea offered the girl to try the tea she had brought. Her words sounded unexpected, and the gentleman was surprised why the princess was acting like this. Medea admitted that she simply admired the sincerity, because she was presented with tea, prepared with her own hands, and it was simply a pity to drink it alone. The maid seemed to be afraid of something, and insisted that she had no right to even try the drink prepared for her masters. The princess insisted on her own, and turned to the lady who made her repeat the words. The maid hid behind the chancellor, who sternly asked why the princess continued to ignore his words. Ignoring him, the lady stood up, holding that very cup of tea in her hands, and headed straight towards the maid. She came up close to her and, pushing the mug forward, loudly declared that she would have to drink it. Fear pierced the maid to the depths of her soul, but it was surprising why she couldn't drink ordinary herbal tea. The chancellor did not understand what was going on here and why the princess was behaving this way, and he began to get angry. Suddenly Medea said, "Can't the lady drink poison that will make her mad? The master defends her, not knowing what is actually in that mug." With fear in her eyes, the maid fell to her knees before the princess, declaring that she had indeed committed a mortal sin. She would either drink the poison or tell the whole truth, and the lady admitted that she did it only because she valued her life. Shiseo looked at his personal maid and was simply shocked, because she had just told the truth. There was poison in this mug. The lady, with tears in her eyes, was ready to accept any punishment just so that she would not be forced to drink. Shiseo still didn't understand what was going on, and asked the princess what had happened and why they were talking about some kind of poison. The maid confessed that the duke had threatened her, that this tea always caused madness, and he told her to give it to the chancellor on purpose. The princess thought it was strange in her past life, but now she knew everyone's moves ahead. The chancellor's future was supposed to be different. The once insightful man suddenly became a recluse. Finally, unable to bear the enveloping hellish madness, he committed suicide one day. It was all because of this tea that the maid brought to the master every day, and he was slowly going crazy. The princess left the punishment to the master's discretion, but now he knew the terrible truth about his subordinates. The guards took the maid away. She screamed that she had made a terrible mistake, but it was unlikely that she would be spared. The chancellor did not say a word. This girl served him for a long time, but turned out to be his worst enemy. They remained in the office alone, and the young man did not even imagine that everything could turn out this way. The princess was ready to defend her family, Valdina, as well as her older brother Peleus, who was now in battle. To do this, she wanted to remove Count Etienne, her uncle's right hand, and wanted to help the chancellor regain control of the inner palace. The game was taking on a completely different course, and Siseo knew he had to make the right decision. The count was a difficult opponent, but the gentleman admitted that he was ready to help the princess with joy. She only needs to communicate her plan and further actions so that he can follow it according to her goals. Cesare's assistant came as if to the boss and said that he had an invitation to an upcoming event, but the gentleman refused to go there. The young man insisted that if he was going to stay here, Valdine, he would have to see Duke Claudio sooner or later anyway. It was a celebration of the princess's recovery, and it was not the first time he had heard of the duke's bad reputation. Cesare sighed heavily. Gallo saw that he felt terrible and was scared, and did the curse really get stronger? Black spots appeared on the gentleman's chest. He could barely breathe, his face was pale, and he left and then asked to bring Terence quickly. Cesare's attacks of black magic became more and more frequent, and Terence was already finding it difficult to contain them on his own. Each time this man came to him, with the help of strong magic, he prevented the spread of the demonic curse. The curse had already lasted for about 3 years. The master's body was at its limit, and he understood this perfectly well. Today, Terence offered to go with him to the magic tower, and the master may not be able to remove the curse, but he can definitely slow it down. Cesare refused every time, and he simply did not want to wait for the slow, painful death that awaited him. He refused him again, assuring him that the magician himself understood everything perfectly well and that talking to the master was useless. He refused elixirs that would provide temporary relief, rituals that could prolong his suffering. Cesare wanted to take a different path. Magic could only slow down the process, delay the inevitable, but not reverse the sentence sooner or later. The darkness would swallow Cesare whole. Cesare always eliminated everything that stood in his way: the first prince, the youngest commander-in-chief. The gentleman managed to achieve the title of Duke of Romagna, and he even became the commander of the Posada mercenary detachment. He had won all this with his own hands, but now he was confident that an ordinary priestess could solve the problem of his curse. Terence asked what he would do if he didn't find her, but the gentleman wasn't ready to give up if there was even one chance. He became a great man, reached this point by clinging to the slightest unquenchable hope. Cesare posed as a mercenary for an arms dealer, even making unfavorable deals with the chancellor, his classmate from the academy. There was not a single moment when it was not a gamble for him, and he did not at all need the easy, ordinary death that was predicted for him. The princess and Neril arrived in an area where poverty was rampant, the air thick with despair. Children in rags, with sunken eyes and pale faces, sat right on the dirty ground, little lost souls. There was a terrible stench all around, a mixture of filth, rot, and hopelessness. She knew about the existence of poverty, but seeing it with her own eyes was a completely different matter. The princess remained calm. They were looking for a man, a retired soldier, or rather his family. Neril asked why they didn't come to the soldiers' village built by order of the princess, and why they probably had a grudge against the royal family. She knew that concrete action, decisive measures, were required to change this situation. There was a village of retired soldiers that Duke Gillyfoss ordered to be built. This village was called Casey's Retreat. Half of the retired soldiers who lived outside the city came to this village, but many have not yet arrived. Among them is the second most important rebel, who in a past life captured the princess, and it was him that she wanted to find. Medea had to meet him and decide something to leave him alive or to kill him in advance so that he would not capture her in the future. They walked carefully along the streets, but suddenly, passing by one of the houses, they heard loud shouts someone was asking for bread. Neril asked the princess to stay outside and wanted to sort things out herself, while Medea only asked that she not hurt anyone under any circumstances. Princess Medea remained on the street, feeling with her skin all the hardships of this god-forsaken corner of the kingdom. Behind her, she heard the creaky voice of an old woman offering to tell her fortune. Holding the steel fan tightly in her hands, the princess was ready for anything in such a place. Medea's intuition told her that this was not a chance meeting. There might be more to this woman's words than just fortune-telling. The old woman, with deep wrinkles on her face and a piercing gaze, seemed wise and all-knowing, she said, despite her appearance. She is the oldest tree in this country. Her rags did not hide her innate dignity, and her voice sounded strangely confident, not typical of beggars. The stranger offered to tell her fortune, but the princess replied that she didn't need fortune-telling at all, and that she already knew everything perfectly well. The old woman insisted that this was precisely why one needed to look, and shouldn't this life be different from the past? Her words made the princess turn around and look at who was talking to her, as if the old woman knew something about her. The old woman smiled, revealing a toothless mouth, and asked again whether the princess had thought carefully before giving a specific answer. In her hands, she held glowing magical stones, which immediately attracted the princess's attention. The old woman began to speak. The girl's life will not be easy either. Chaos blocks her path, and it still obscures the holy city and tries to take away her light. Medea listened to her attentively while the old woman spoke about her future, and asked the girl not to worry. Suddenly she said very strange words. There is one giant star that gives away and will cut through the chaos in front of the princess. The words made her think, but whatever it was, the princess didn't need it, and she was sure that she could handle it alone. The old woman said with confidence that it would be difficult for her on this path. Vile people would cling to her honor, dignity, and here she needed an assistant. Be careful in your decisions. Each of them can have far-reaching consequences. Medea listened attentively. Every word of the old woman echoed in her heart. She felt her determination growing within her. The old woman asked if the princess had heard of a magic stone called the Tear of Dawn. This mysterious medicine contains the great power of the Almighty Goddess. It erases everything in this world, diseases, memories, and even fate. This tear will save the giant star. The old woman held the princess's hand and said that the heavens love her very much. So much so that they fill all the starlight to displace the 12 constellations and return them. Her prophecy stated that the girl's body contained the blood of the wisest man on the continent, the one who conveyed the will of the goddess. She called the princess the only one who could find the mysterious tear under this gloomy sky, but before she could come to an agreement, she began to cough violently. The princess asked the old woman to see a doctor, but she refused, and this was her warning from heaven. Almost out of breath, she whispered, the princess's heart remained just as kind. If she follows her own path, choosing reason and nobility, her life will not yet be cut short. A strange old woman, like a wise advisor, seemed to appear to guide her and warn her against mistakes. This mysterious meeting could not be called a coincidence, and the princess took her words seriously. Before leaving, the old woman turned around and asked her not to forget everything she had said, and only then would she be able to defeat all the terrible enemies. She remembered every word, every look, trying to understand the true meaning of the prediction. Fate, insidious and unpredictable, decided to make its own adjustments at that very second. Like shadows sliding along the wall, Cesare passed by her. He seemed like a mysterious ghost wandering the streets in search of peace. They passed by almost without noticing each other. Perhaps they are destined to meet again. A whisper of fate swept over the city. Their paths will inevitably cross, weaving their lives into a complex knot when the master finds the answers to his questions. The little poor children sitting on the ground, seeing the gentleman, were incredibly frightened. He and his partners were looking for someone here. The informant said that he saw an old woman in these slums who spoke an ancient continental language. There was a sign on her things that looked like the symbol of a tribe, but it had been destroyed long ago, so it was difficult to be sure. Besides, there were too many alleys here, and no one knew whether they would have time to see everything today. Cesare walked with the hope that he was moving in the right direction, and suddenly the same old woman appeared in front of them, who admitted that the gentleman was late. She already thought that she would have to be the first to go to the next world, but fortunately the master managed to find her. They didn't know who she was, but only Cesare felt that this was the very priestess of the Shade tribe that he had been looking for a long time. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles and her eyes seemed to see through walls. She smiled and he found her. The old woman's eyes glowed with an emerald light. She said something about a black star, and what a pity that an evil fate had befallen his destiny. The primordial darkness does not recede until the victim's breath is cut off, and the master understood perfectly well what she was talking about. He fell on his knees before her and asked if the old woman knew how to get rid of the terrible curse forever. He admitted that he was looking for her, the priestess who was once the leader of an ancient tribe, and if she helped him, he promised to help in restoring the tribe. The old woman warned that the affairs of her clan were not something that this man could simply interfere with, but she knew a way to get rid of the curse. It took a morning tear to erase the initial darkness, but no one could understand what exactly she was talking about. The old woman said that the tear was the grief of the supreme goddess who once remained on this cursed land. When the goddess first descended into this world, it was filled with only chaos and darkness, and the merciful goddess, taking pity on the oppressed life, shed her tears, which washed away the darkness from the earth. Cesare wanted to know where she could be found, but the old woman's words were mysterious and incomprehensible. She waved her bony hand, pointing at the master, and said the words "Black Star" again. Placing her hand on his shoulder, the old woman said tremblingly, "Unfortunately, this star does not exist in his orbit." After listening attentively to her prophecy, Terence loudly asked what it all meant, and that the old woman was talking nonsense. The old woman was weak. She was coughing heavily and warned that he would never be able to find a tear. Fate would never allow this to happen. The old woman coughed, hoarsely swallowing the invisible dust of centuries, and spoke a prophecy. She spoke of the darkness that consumed Cesare from within, of the curse that bound his soul, and of the path that leads to salvation. Looking into his eyes, the old woman croaked, "Only the Venus of Valdina can break his terrible curse, and only the one." However, the old woman's strength was running out. With each word, her breathing became more and more intermittent, and her eyes faded like burning candles. The tribe's priestess smiled and said, "It has finally happened, and the biggest stars have aligned again." He hungrily caught every word, afraid to miss the key phrase, hoping to find salvation in scraps of ancient knowledge. Cesare felt her fragile connection to this world fraying, and he knew that there was very little time left. The old woman fell silent. Her body went limp. Her gaze stared into space. Her last breath escaped her lips. A dead silence reigned. The prophecy was finished. She died suddenly. The heroes had just found a clue. The old woman had left, leaving only vague words. Cesare realized that only Valdina's Venus could save him, and with her help he could lift the terrible curse. He ordered Gallo to contact the capital, warned that they would have to stay in Valdina, and the old woman's balsa, which had recently been squeezing his hands, were now cold. He had time. He had time to find out something. Now he knew how to remove the curse, but this knowledge came too late. He had to pay an exorbitant price for it. Venus Valdina. The old woman's last words still rang in his ears, fragments of a prophecy that would link his fate with the princess. Neril returned to her mistress and was worried and envious that she had to be next to her all this time and watch over her. But it was unlikely that they would be able to leave this place peacefully because suddenly voices were heard in one of the houses, and Neril was ready to help again. A red-haired lady was sitting on the floor and screaming, "She doesn't know anything, and Theo, whom this man is looking for, has already run away a long time ago." He definitely didn't want to believe it, and warned that if the girl continued to behave like that, he would sell her first. He reached out with a dirty hand, wanting to grab her by the hair and take her away with him, and the girl closed her eyes, hoping that someday this would end. Every day she prayed for this horror to end, and as if her prayers were answered today, the princess came to her aid. Neril held her sword in front of the villain, who certainly didn't expect anyone to appear here. He raised his hands up and asked where they suddenly came from. He was unarmed, in the face of a sharp blade. All he could do was run, without looking back, until the danger was over, but he would definitely return. He shouted to the red-haired lady that she would definitely go to her, no matter where she was hiding. Sitting on the floor, the lady could not believe her salvation. Looking at the princess, she thanked her with all her heart. The princess looked at the girl sitting in rags, her body covered in bruises, her hair dirty and disheveled. Medea asked if her brother's name was really Theo, and it turned out he was her twin brother. Looking at this girl, she remembered terrible pictures from her past, because it was her brother, her twin, who once grabbed her. Perhaps then she would have managed to escape, if not for this Theo, thanks to whom her tragic fate took shape. Then he was ordered to find the princess, and as soon as he saw her, he helped other people catch and capture him. This girl was very similar to the young man Theo, whom the heroine met in her past life. The girl told the princess that she lived completely alone, without a family, so there was no one to protect her. "My brother left home 3 years ago. He would occasionally make contact, but he said that he would not be able to return now or in the near future." The princess thought, this means that her brother has already joined the rebels and things are really bad. The girl recognized Medea as a princess from the royal palace, and touching her hand, she seemed to expect help from her. She heard the man who threatened her call Her Highness a princess. She looked at her savior with pleading eyes, asking her to take her to work for her, because if she stayed here, she would simply be sold, and this man would return. Even if she didn't go with the princess, the lady could arrange her life so that she would be safe. Medea asked for forgiveness. She did not take just anyone, and moreover, she knew who her brother was. The girl pleaded. Perhaps the princess did not trust an ordinary commoner, but she was ready to do any work and do anything. Even unpleasant or secret assignments that the princess could never entrust to other people, and she was ready for anything. Perhaps in the future she would regret choosing the princess as her mistress, but she assured that everything was fine, and now she was making her conscious choice. Sitting on her knees before the princess, she believed that something could change her fate, because without her help, she would not succeed. Extending her hand, the princess offered to go with her, but warned that the lady must be prepared for anything. Her heart, tired of intrigue and lies, saw a glimmer of hope in this sincere plea. The decision was made instantly, and irrevocably Medea would take this girl with her. Behind the door, like shadows from a nightmare, assassins were already waiting for them, mercenaries whose faces were distorted by a grimace, clutching naked blades in their hands, ready to carry out a dirty order. The princess and the commoner approached the carriage, but someone had been watching them the whole time. Neril sensed danger. Some men were hiding behind the bushes, but they didn't wait long and immediately came out. They surrounded the carriage, asking where such lovely girls were rushing to. They had weapons in their hands, and they clearly did not wish them well. The most important thing of them, the man with the scar on his face stated, was that they had not yet finished with the calculations, and the girls were already getting ready to leave. The girl with red hair screamed, "These are the same human traffickers who were going to kidnap and sell her." Holding a rope in his hands, the villain said that they were owed a tidy sum for this young lady, and they could not just let her go. And if the ladies don't want to resolve the issue the hard way, they'd better lay out all the money they have so they'll just let them go. The princess quietly asked Narelle not to get involved in dirty dealings with these fools and to resolve the issue calmly. She threw a bag of money right at the gang leader's feet and declared that this would be more than enough. The bag contained gold coins, a ransom for this girl, to save her life and not interfere with the gang's affairs. The princess herself came out to them so that they could see that a lady of royal blood was standing before them, and they would no longer think of bothering this girl. Medea loudly declared that she was ready to buy this commoner, and the leader was surprised at what a generous hostess appeared before them. Here's the thing, as the young lady said, this is more than a generous price for this skinny girl, but it turned out that the traders were not going to stop. One of them made it clear that if they captured the princess, they could get 5 times the ransom for those of special royal blood. The girl looked at everything that was happening with frightened eyes, and the princess asked her to wait in the carriage and under no circumstances to go out anywhere. It seemed the villains did not want to resolve the issue peacefully, so Medea gave the order for Narelle to eliminate them all and sort things out as quickly as possible. The men chuckled. Was it really possible that one girl was going to deal with a crowd of men? And was she really that brave? Having laid bare their dreams, they were sure that now the stupid lady would be on her knees begging for mercy, but they did not know who was in front of them. At the princess's command, she charged against the gang of human traffickers like a shadow descending from the blade of a sword. Not a moment's hesitation, not a single sign of fear. The first blow was like a clap of thunder, Neryl's sword cutting through the air, crashing down on the nearest thug before he could even make a sound. The merchants, caught off guard, tried to organize resistance, but their chaotic attacks were powerless against Neryl's honed skill. They realized that the princess's guard was too strong, but the gang leader still believed that he could win. Taking advantage of the moment, he saw the princess standing alone and decided to attack her directly in order to capture this woman. A wave of a steel fan. In her hands, the princess held a cold weapon given to her by the queen. In her past life, the heroine learned this the hard way, watching the soldiers who treated her like baggage. She learned this from watching her lover Jason, who simply watched from the sidelines as the soldiers mocked the girl. Back then, she didn't know how to defend herself, but now only she could stand up for herself using dexterity and cold calculation. It seemed that the fragile and elegant accessory in her hands was turning into a weapon worthy of the most experienced warriors. She deftly threw one of its blades, thin and razor-sharp, like a deadly needle. In an instant, the blade, cutting through the air with a quiet whistle, cut through the throat of the villain who was trying to attack from behind. Her gaze slid over the remaining enemies, assessing the balance of power, looking for vulnerabilities, not a drop of fear, not a shadow of doubt in her beautiful eyes. Neryle was amazed, but it was not at all surprised her mistress had always been brave. The battle was not over yet. There was still the main villain who had been waiting all this time. With a furious cry, he rushed into the attack, throwing several blades straight towards the princess. The princess took a step back, the fan opening in her hand again, like a blooming steel flower, no longer just a decoration, but a deadly shield and weapon at the same time. The battle became a deadly dance, with her leading and her enemies falling like puppets whose strings had snapped. None of them expected that at that moment, stones would fly out of nowhere, reflecting the blows of all the blades at once. The princess stood frozen in amazement, like a statue, a fragile rose in the midst of a storm of steel, holding a steel fan in her hands that had suddenly become a useless leaf in the face of an unknown force. Neryle was frightened. Her mistress could have just been wounded, and she again felt terrible guilt. She apologized, and maybe she should have been faster, but luckily everything was fine. There was only one gang leader left, and the lady asked if they should all be killed, and the princess only had to give the order. Maybe it wasn't worth getting your hands dirty now, but on the other hand, it was necessary to remove all the witnesses. Time was running out. Medea gave the order to deal with the remaining bandits quickly. Neryle swung her bloody sword, knowing no pity, knowing no mercy towards such people. The man prayed for salvation, and there was nothing else left for him. He was facing death itself, but it was too late. Someone threw these stones, stones of salvation, and it was not just a gesture of protection, but a challenge thrown in the face of death. The villains were destined for a vile fate in response to their terrible deeds, but all this time someone was keeping a close eye on the carriage. It was Mr. Cesare and his partner, who had never seen such a terrible thirst for blood before. This woman was definitely the Princess of Valdina. The young man was surprised. The girl hit him right in the vulnerable spots, and what princess could fight so well? Perhaps, behind the veil of darkness, there lurked more than just a savior, an ally, a spark of loyalty ready to ignite the flames of retribution. A steel flower, blooming in a deadly dance, each beat of which is like the flapping of the wings of an angel of death. Princess Valdina, with her steel fan, a dancing Valkyrie in the whirlwind of battle, was incomparable in Cesare's eyes. And it is unlikely that this golden star of Valdina, shining brighter than the most expensive diamonds, could be an ordinary person. Fortunately, the girl whom the princess brought to the royal palace that day had already settled in perfectly and felt safe. The maids say she is very hardworking and smart, and everyone really liked her. The princess asked Narelle if she had found the old woman she had spoken of, but unfortunately they could not find a single yes. The heroine so wanted to meet her at least one more time, but this meeting was probably the first and only one, and she remembered her words well. In the body of the young lady flows the blood of the one who was once the wisest on the continent. The princess tried to understand what these words could mean, and there was only one wise man on the continent. Perhaps this was the very truth she had been searching for so long. The princess stood up abruptly, slammed the book shut, and ran out of the room as if struck by electricity. Narelle didn't have time to ask anything, and only saw how the princess instantly disappeared into the corridor. The old woman's words echoed in her head as she ran down the stairs, further and further down the dark corridor. The sage of the continent, the sage and the country protected by the sage's magical stone, called Valdina. But what if the sage's stone protects this country because its owner was the most ancient ancestor of Valdina? With every step the air became thicker, saturated with the smell of dust and ancient secrets, like the breath of eternity. In the center of the hall, on a pedestal, looking at the world through the veil of millennia, a blue stone glowed, the eye of the sage. The stone pulsed with a soft azure light, a living heart ready to reveal its secrets only to the worthy, and as if responding to her approach, the stone shone brighter. The princess took the mysterious relic in her hands and whispered that the gods would tell her the truth and show her the way. The stone illuminated the dark dungeon with advice, and the lady asked that if there was anything the sages wanted to convey to her, she was ready to hear it. A huge crack appeared on the magic crystal. It was a warning sign that the princess was going in the right direction. The light from the magic stone shone even brighter, and the princess couldn't believe her eyes. The crack grew larger and larger, and now in the center of the crystal she clearly saw a small bottle with an image of that very tear of dawn. The next day, an exciting event for aristocrats took place in one of the districts of Valdina. All the nobility gathered there, and the Duchess, standing next to the princess, admitted that this was her favorite opera, so she had specially hired new actors and musicians. Catherine tried to improve her previous relationship with Medea and tried in every possible way to win her favor. Not surprisingly, the aria sounded somehow awkward, quite unusual, and the princess immediately noted this. The Duchess smiled, and perhaps she should have noticed earlier that the lady was dissatisfied, and she asked for forgiveness. Verna sighed and admitted that her aunt had screwed up again and asked the princess not to be angry with her. The Duchess took Medea by the hands and was sure that she was still trapped. The banquet that was to take place today was an event at which Medea's honor and dignity were to be lost. Catherine smiled falsely and warned that the banquet would be held in honor of the princess's recovery, and all the influential people would be there. The ducal family, the Duchy of Claudio, held a small reception to welcome the princess in public and celebrate her recovery. The Duchess even prepared the most elegant jewelry and invited the princess to choose her favorite dress. The robes were so exquisite and luxurious that even Lady Verna was incredibly delighted. The Duchess noted that the princess had been so depressed lately because of everything that had happened, and she had prepared something especially for her. She openly tried to win her favor, and supposedly the outfits and jewelry were modest preparations. The shelves were piled high with jewels, fiery rubies whispering of passion, sapphires as deep as the sea abyss, the most elegant shoes, like outfits, beckoning with the promise of luxury and power. Verna, the Duchess's daughter, could not believe her eyes that her mother, whose pragmatism was known throughout the court, had supposedly arranged all this in honor of the princess's recovery. Medea was ready to play her game and said that she had no idea that her aunt cared about her so much. Catherine replied that she would never be happier than to be recognized as a princess, and Verna was angry that she was being treated like a queen and barely reacted. Medea could not help but notice this, because her sister's disgust wafted throughout the entire room. The Duchess had saved something for last, one special dress, and she really wanted the princess to wear it for today's banquet. She asked her daughter to accompany the princess properly when she changed her clothes, and Verna felt absolutely terrible. The Duchess's maids politely offered to help the princess get ready for the celebration, but she refused. Medea asked for help from Mary, her confidant, the one she had thrown out of prison. Now Maria was on her side. She followed the princess's orders unquestioningly and with respect. Verna was beside herself with anger. She was filled with disgust and hatred towards her little sister. Biting her lips, she was confident that the stupid girl couldn't even throw out the maid who handed her over, and how could she possibly wear such good clothes with dignity? She wanted only herself to shine in the social world, but the princess's face doesn't even suit such luxurious dresses. Princess Medea came out in a luxurious dress. The light fabric of the dress seemed to flow around her, creating an aura of unearthly beauty and grace. Rage seethed in Verna's chest like a volcano. She hated Medea with all her heart, with every cell of her body. She hated her beauty, her nobility. Each stone sparkled in the light of the candelabra, reflecting magical reflections on the princess's alabaster skin. She was beautiful, like an unearthly fairy, as if the starlight from the heavens had descended upon her, and no one could hide their admiration except Verna. More than anything in the world, she did not want the princess to appear before everyone in such an expensive dress and outshine her. Now, with the appearance of Medea, all her plans collapsed like a house of cards in a gust of wind. The maid presented a dress for the Duchess's daughter. It was modest, and the lady certainly could not go out into the hall with the princess wearing it. If she stood next to Medea in this modest, plain dress, she knew all the guests would be whispering. What she was most afraid of was that she would be judged for her bad taste, if anything, that she looked like an ordinary servant. So she would become just a dark background for the princess, for this despicable half-breed whom she hated so much. Anger choked her, forcing her to clench her fists until her knuckles turned white, and insidious plans swarmed in her head, full of envy and a thirst for revenge. She had to find a way to stop Medea, to take away her shine and regain the attention she deserved. Otherwise, hatred would eat her up from the inside. The princess approached her and asked her opinion whether this luxurious dress, studded with the most precious stones and made of the most expensive silk, suited her. A grimace distorted her face, and through clenched teeth the lady said, "This dress definitely suits her." Guests gathered for a celebration in honor of the princess's recovery, the palace halls sparkling in the light of hundreds of candles. The champagne sparkled like a scattering of diamonds, sparkling with every movement, with every toast. Rumor has it that the princess herself organized this reception. The guests thought it was too much, and didn't she know what was going on outside? The country was in a state of war. The streets were full of people who were dying of hunger right now. Margrave Montego, a relative of the royal family, holding a glass in his hands, was angry. Why was it necessary to arrange such luxury? The Duchess and the Duke smiled at all the guests, and the man admitted that what could he do? The princess was probably still young and far from mature. He knew perfectly well that the royal seal was in her hands, and supposedly she had nothing to fear, but pleasing her was still an impossible task. However, behind this ostentatious pomp, there was a sinister shadow. Everything was carefully planned to provoke indignation among the guests. The Duchess said that the princess had decided to hold such a reception at this particular time, and it was impossible to dissuade her. Their plan was now all set, and as soon as the princess appeared in that luxurious dress, everything would go exactly as they had planned. The calculation was simple: to sow the seed of doubt in the hearts of the aristocrats, to provoke indignation and undermine trust in the ruling dynasty. The presenter loudly announced the appearance of Her Royal Highness Princess Medea and the young lady Verna of the Duchy of Claudio. The main thing is to sow discord and weaken the positions of those who pose a threat to her own ambitions. Imagine the surprise of the Duchess and Duke when they saw the princess and Verna, but everything went wrong. The Duchess's daughter, Lady Claudio, wore the luxurious dress that was intended for the princess. How did this happen? Everything was well planned, and the Duchess herself sent the princess to change into this outfit, but now her daughter was shining in an expensive dress. The princess was wearing a modest black robe, no jewelry, no frills. All eyes were on their exit, or rather on the Duke's daughter, who looked too luxurious, like a real queen. Verna was happy. All the guests were looking at her, every single one of them, and that was exactly what she wanted. She knew that this palace suited her much better than the ducal castle, and all her life she dreamed of being the first in the royal palace. Now Medea was her insignificant shadow, but unfortunately, silly Verna didn't even understand what she had done. The Count approached Verna, mistaking her for a princess, and bowed politely and respectfully before the royal personage. He identified himself as a servant of the Montag, who had returned from the border to pay his respects to the great princess. Unfortunately, Verna didn't even know who this person was, and when she looked at him, she made a surprised face. Princess Medea bowed, admitting that the Margrave had come a long way, and now he had simply made a mistake, mistaking the princess for someone else. The man asked to forgive his rudeness. Time had no power over the princess, and he did not recognize her at first. He guessed that everything seemed to be completely different from what Duke Claudio had told him, and the princess looked more than modest. Catherine ran up to her daughter, grabbed her by the shoulders, and excitedly asked why she had made a dress that was meant for a princess. The Margrave inquired who was standing next to Her Highness, and it turned out that it was a young lady from the house of Duke Claudio. The Duchess was at a loss to justify herself because her daughter, during such a difficult time for the people, stood in incredibly expensive clothing. The Margrave spoke loudly. Now he could clearly see how much his niece wanted to be like Her Highness. The Duchess angrily said why her daughter was behaving like this, and that her uncle might misunderstand everything, and the princess asked not to scold her too much. Medea said that Verna wanted to wear this dress so much, so she gave it to her, but that was her wonderful plan. And only now did the silly girl finally understand what a mistake she had made, simply wanting to shine in front of everyone. When the princess changed into this dress, she approached Verna and asked if she really wanted to wear it so badly. She immediately agreed, but now she realized that Medea had deliberately arranged all this to discredit her honor and dignity. The ducal house had always showered her with generous gifts, and so this time she decided to reciprocate. Lady Verna set her sights on Her Highness's dress. The guests whispered, "She doesn't know her place at all, and she did it at such a difficult time." The princess said loudly, "Everyone knows. His Majesty is at war, the people are starving, and as a princess she cannot afford such luxury." One of the girls asked, "Because the princess is the only sister of His Majesty, the great ruler, and no matter what dress she made, no one would dare to open their mouth and reproach her for what she had done." Medea answered that it was true. She was the only princess of Valdina, and no matter what she put on herself, the essence of it would not change, and why worry about such trifles? Everything was truly so. No one would demand any proof from the princess, and everyone understood that she had no need to adorn herself with bulky outfits, as the duke's daughter did. To ease the tension, the duke raised his glass and asked for the guests' attention, and as everyone knows, the feast was being held in honor of the princess. He made a speech. Her Highness tirelessly carried out state affairs in place of His Majesty, and even undermined her health by working beyond her limits. Although this feast was not comparable to the noble works of Her Highness, he asked everyone to know that it was intended to honor her well-being and health. The Margrave was surprised, but even the Duke extols her above the king himself, and this is very strange. And the Duke loudly declared that the very existence of the princess was the glory of Valdina. All the guests raised their glasses to express their respect to the great princess, and this toast was to Her Highness Medea. The princess was ready for something like this. She knew what all this falsehood and feigned words were about, and she also knew perfectly well who this man really was. His gaze was unrecognizable, the wolfish eyes of the one who had torn her brother to pieces, destroyed her, and seized the throne of Valdina. This time she wasn't going to give in so easily, and it was unlikely that this man had any idea what she was capable of. The lady said solemnly that she was glad that the ducal house of Claudio cared for them so much, but didn't she understand what her uncle hadn't finished saying? Today was an unusual night, the night of St. Esther, when the eternal star of victory rises. The guests stood in bewilderment. They heard a strange sound coming from the street. And the princess said, "This feast was conceived as a prayer for victory on the battlefield for His Majesty, who is now in the distant steppes." She stood near the window. Bright flashes appeared in the night sky, and Medea loudly asked for the saint's grace for those who were in battle. Bright sparks and a spear-shaped pattern appeared in the night sky, and the guests watched in fascination. It was the spear of Saint Esther, and had the saint descended upon Valdina, and this was a sign that His Majesty would soon return. The Duke looked angrily out the window, not understanding what kind of nonsense was going on now, and what the saint had to do with it. He must have been confused. This was not a selfish plan, and in a past life this feast turned into a real nightmare for the princess. Then the uncle played with her as he wanted. She was just a little puppet in his skillful hands. The brother guessed his true intentions and tried in every possible way to warn his sister, telling her the whole truth. One day he asked her not to let her uncle get too close under any circumstances, because he knew that this would turn into a real tragedy for the princess. And now, looking into the night sky at the flying and soon, she mentally asked her brother for forgiveness for not listening to him then. The guests rejoiced at the victory. It was a sign of things to come, but for now the princess was unable to overthrow her uncle. She couldn't even avenge her brother, who was torn to pieces by monsters, but she was not alone, and she tried to do everything possible. In front of the night sky and all the guests, she folded her hands in a prayerful gesture, closed her eyes, and prayed for his victory. She prayed that her brother would stay alive, and perhaps she would be able to change not only her own fate, but also the fate of her loved ones. Fierce battles continued on the distant borders, and that night the soldiers set up camp nearby to rest. His Highness Peleus, the princess's brother, had been here for a long time, but fortunately he was still alive. Peleus's closest comrade, D'Angel, approached the commander and asked him what he was so deeply thinking about. In his hands he held a small amulet. In it was a photograph of his little sister, and today for some reason he remembered her. Hope trembled in his soul. The current king of Valdina, Peleus Lionel de Valdina, bent over the amulet that was dear to him and admitted that today had been a particularly dreary night. Princess Medea, like a fragile flower, withstood the onslaught of the treacherous winds that blew from the direction of the Duke and Duchess. She spoke of the sacrifices made by the royal family, the hardships of the people, and the hope for a speedy return of peace and prosperity, and her speech touched the hearts of many, but not all. Lady Verna stood in the shadows, her face distorted with anger and envy, the princess's words cutting her like daggers, reminding her of her own insignificance and powerlessness. Medea didn't just defend her honor, she eclipsed Verna, took away her attention and admiration, leaving only the bitter taste of defeat and burning hatred. Now Verna was thirsty for revenge, and her mind was feverishly searching for a way to crush the princess, no matter what. She walked over to the glass of wine and carefully poured some white powder into it, hoping that her plan would finally work. Turning to her personal maid, Verna gave the order for her to immediately serve this glass to Sister Medea. The maid realized what the Duke's daughter wanted to do, and she was overcome with incredible fear. There was a palace banquet today, and she was sure Verna needed to be more careful, and this act was too stupid. Verna didn't want to listen to her. She hit the maid on the foot with her shoe and asked her to shut up. "Pass her the glass," the lady declared. "She is her mistress, and the maid does not dare to order her, and she should go immediately." She was confident of her victory, and perhaps today she would finally achieve what she wanted. Behind her she heard a familiar voice. It was her brother, who understood her intention. The young man asked what she was going to do. It was impossible to do that today, and they were all being stared at. Verna said angrily. The princess had made a fool of her, and she wanted to take revenge on her. After falling from her horse, Medea almost died, and then became a completely different person, and truly wanted to crush her before she became completely insolent. The young man warned once again that nothing could be done today, and it would immediately become clear who was behind all of this. Her brother asked her not to rush, assuring her that he and her father would wait for the right moment and finish with her forever. If his sister understood him, she should not do anything stupid and think carefully about her actions. It was already too late. Her brother had no idea what she had just decided to do. Verna didn't care at all what happened next, and her main goal was to eliminate the princess today. At this time, the maid had already presented a glass for mead, and this act was too stupid for everything to work out. Count Etienne was present at the gala banquet, and after the ceremonial speech, he immediately hurried to the princess. The lady admitted that they had not seen the minister for a long time, and during this time, it seemed, he had become even larger. She held that very glass in her hands, and as soon as she brought it to her lips, she smelled a strange smell. It was impossible not to remember this smell, and she had encountered something similar once before. The minister asked if the princess had really arranged such a luxurious celebration, and that it was all thanks to her. At this time, banquets of such a grand scale had become a rarity, so the minister was planning to get drunk to his heart's content. The princess replied that as the minister had said, His Majesty would not have allowed a banquet of such a scale to be held, and whose permission was it that opened it. Medea also did not remember the minister putting his seal on it, and now she was going to find out. The gentleman's face instantly changed to a serious one. He invited the princess to talk in person, alone, without prying eyes. They walked into a room where no one was, the dim light of a candle illuminating its darkness. She held that very glass in her hands and asked the minister to enter the room so that the conversation could take place. The minister laughed out loud, wondering if His Majesty had done something stupid again, and now he would have to deal with it again. The affairs of the inner court were incredibly complicated. He promised the princess not to worry, and he was ready to solve all the problems. The red wine was reflected in the expensive crystal glass, and the lady asked if this was true, and that lately the minister seemed to be taking on too much. Etienne croaked out who the princess's ally was in this huge palace, and whether she should tease him like that when he was the one who controlled the courtyard. He suggested that the princess not interfere in these matters, but simply continue doing what she was doing before. This man always remained unpunished, having huge connections, and was sure that the princess would not be able to achieve anything. Etienne warned that if anything happened, bruises might appear on that beautiful face if she did not obey his will. The minister grinned, leaning smugly back in his chair, and believed that the princess was too naive for this serious game, and she would not dare touch him. That moment of solitude was the perfect storm she had been waiting for, the perfect opportunity. The princess said softly, "Mrs. Queejan once told her the same thing, and where is she now?" Supposedly, when she thought about everything that happened, she felt sad. Who would have thought that everything could turn out like this in one night? The minister was perplexed as to whether the princess really wanted to put him on the same level as that girl. The princess said the lady left strange words before her death, and she probably wanted the princess to know about one more person. Queejan said that in the royal palace there was a maggot dirtier and stinkier than her, and that only by catching it would the royal court finally return to normal, and dirty people would no longer rule there. But this larva, you see, with an ugly appearance, unable to perform night duties, its lineage was interrupted, and one day it was simply weeded out. The princess said that this maggot tortures children to restore their shattered pride, and beads of sweat appeared on the minister's fat, disgusting face, and his teeth began to grind. The princess asked why the gentleman's face turned red in an instant, and he insisted that it was simply too hot in the room, and that was probably the reason. The minister understood that the pathetic maid had to be finished off before she died, but she managed to tell something, and looking at the glass of red wine, the princess asked if the minister had any idea what specific person the lady was talking about. The minister was confident that he was in complete control of the situation, and that this pathetic girl didn't know what she was talking about, but now he needed to keep his cover from getting out. The princess stood up and asked the minister to find out, for her as a princess, who this man really was, and she had been thinking about this for a long time. She showed him that even an influential person like him could be a small pawn on a huge chessboard, and said that she was ready to rely on him, and the minister actually understood everything. Before her death, Mrs. Queejan had called him a dirty maggot, and now his hands were shaking because the truth could soon be revealed. He realized the game could be over. All his carefully laid plans, all the years of manipulation and deception, would soon be exposed. In panic, his gaze darted around the table and caught hold of the glass, the very glass into which the Duke's daughter, Lady Verna, had poured the powder. The princess knew that Etienne, a miserable drunkard and coward, would do just that out of fear, and so he grabbed the glass with a trembling hand and, without thinking, drained it to the bottom. Life, which seemed so easy and cloudless, in one instant turned into a nightmare in which he was the main villain. His faithful assistant stood outside the office while the minister shouted that the wine was too warm and that the stupid, useless guard should bring new ones. Etienne was so angry that he was ready to destroy everything around him, but all he could do was drink himself to death. Princess Medea left the office, leaving him alone with his own greed. But today there was another unexpected meeting. A respectable gentleman in a luxurious outfit approached her, bowed to the princess, and stated his name. Lord Gallo, Cesare's loyal lieutenant, appeared at the event, introducing himself as the arms merchant Posada and greeting the valiant Princess Valdina. He couldn't help but notice that Esther's spear was launched into the sky. It was simply magnificent, and it became a beautiful blessing, perfect for the banquet. It was no mere coincidence, and Mr. Cesare noted that the timing was simply too perfect for the saint's blessing. Duty called her, and she was ready to answer this call. The game continued, but for Princess Medea it was no longer a holiday, but a battle. She asked who the man standing next to him was, and the Lord replied that he was his best friend, who was always making inappropriate jokes. Cursed by dark magic, he searched in vain for salvation, and this ball was his planned move. The opportunity to appear before the princess herself seemed ideal. The old woman, whose prophecies always came true, warned Cesare that it was she, the princess, who must break the sinister curse that poisoned his soul, and their destinies were already intertwined.